Chapter 365, Gossip in the Cottage. Chapter 365, Gossip in the Cottage. In the divine capital, Book Mountain was particularly lively at the moment. Mr. Du from the cottage had returned. Although college disciples did not know much about Mr. Du, it did not affect the image of Mr. Du, the old man who was said not to know how to cultivate, in their minds. Since the first 3 disciples of the cottage were all so powerful, it further displayed how extraordinary their master must be. Perhaps some people would think that Mr. Du was lucky and all his disciples happened to be extremely talented. This was a fact, but why would he get these disciples in the first place? And why did the cottage disciples follow him willingly? This alone was enough for the rest to ponder. That time when Sword Saint became famous, countless people yearned for a place in the cottage. Later, Gu Donglu also became famous and the name of the cottage shook the entire Eastern Barren territory, attracting the attention of everyone. Now, after the battle between the second disciple and Qin Yu on Sky Mountain, this particular summit on Book Mountain had already become a legend. Even the members of the college were curious about what kind of mysterious place the cottage was. There was obviously nothing special about the place itself. Yi Futian and his team walked up the mountain. Meanwhile, Zhuge Hui, Gu Donglu and the rest who had received the news came out to welcome them. Second sister, third brother, Yi Futian shouted, smiling. The 2 nodded in return. However, the second sister only looked at Mr. Du. Her usually happy eyes looked somewhat wronged at the moment as she said softly, "Master, you have left us for so long. Now you finally returned." The old man smiled and said, "Girl, I returned because I know that you will miss me." Although Yi Futian already knew on their way that Mr. Du would address his second sister like this, he still felt somewhat weird when Mr. Du really called so before her. "You know that I miss you. Even though you are here now, will you slip away again someday?" The second sister looked at her master with her eyes filled with suspicion. "Even if I leave, I will leave properly." "What's slip away?" The old man then looked at Gu Donglu and said, "3, what do you say?" "Master, whatever you say is obviously correct." Gu Donglu nodded seriously. "Yup, I think that you are better to me, unlike some girl. Sigh, she is not even as obedient as some other girls outside." The old man shook his head and sighed, after which he walked forward with his head held high. "Master, I'm just afraid that you will leave us here again." Zhuge Hui walked up to Mr. Du and grabbed his arm. "That's better," the old man nodded in satisfaction. The second sister raised her head and realized that Shui Yi and Luo Fan were staring at her. Smiling, she put her hand on her belt and said, "What are you looking at? Go and cook some good food for the master." The 2 immediately shivered. After they returned from Sky Mountain, the second sister had always been doing a little action, touching her belt. This action was indeed frightening. "Master, sister, wait for a short while. I will go and cook now," Luo Fan said without hesitation. Then, he quickly fled from the place. Yi Futian rolled his eyes. The second sister was grabbing the master's arm like a little girl, while the arrogant third brother was standing beside the master quietly. From the scene, it was obvious what position the master had in the cottage. It seemed like whether he could have a happy life in the future would depend very much on the master. Thinking about this, he widened his eyes at Yi Shaoshi who was beside him. Because of him, the master had such a bad first impression. Yi Futian hoped that the master would not mind that incident. Yi Shaoshi, however, did not seem to have noticed anything as he continued to walk forward in silence. The group arrived at the hut, where Luo Fan and Shui Yi were busy cooking. The master sat down, and the second sister also sat down beside him. The third brother remained standing, so Yi Futian and the rest clearly did not dare to sit down. "Why are you all looking at me? Sit down." The old man widened his eyes at everyone. "Yes, master." The third brother nodded and sat down. Only then did the rest follow. "Master, when you were not here, I took a disciple privately, Futian. You have also met with him." Yu Sheng is Futian's good friend and is helping to cut wood in the cottage. Luolan Shui is Futian's servant and takes care of his accommodation, Gu Donglu said. Okay. The old man nodded. Smiling, he looked at Yi Futian and Luolan Shui and said, Kid, you really know how to enjoy yourself. Master, that time I actually did not want to agree to Luolan Shui becoming my servant. However, the brothers and sisters told me that you may return to the cottage anytime. Therefore, I asked her to stay here so that if you have anything, you can ask her for help, Yi Futian said, smiling. You started thinking for me before even seeing me. How filial. The old man smiled and looked at Yi Futian. That's what I should do. The second sister and third brother have told me that as a cottage disciple, the most important thing is to respect the master. They often remind me to show filial respect to you when I see you, Yi Futian continued, grinning. Although Mr. Du had been smiling and looked very friendly, Yi Futian felt that Mr. Du was able to see through him, causing him to feel somewhat stressed. Terrific. Luo Fan who was cooking looked at Yi Futian in admirable. When Yi Futian said this, he also complimented the second sister and third brother. Yi Shaoshi also sighed in his heart. He had yet to learn Yi Futian's skills. Little brother is right. In the cottage, apart from Xing'er, little brother has always been the most obedient one, the second sister said, smiling. Second sister, you're the best. Yi Futian was somewhat touched. The old man nodded and said, recently the Eastern Barren Territory is not peaceful. Girl, didn't I warn you against fighting easily outside? Master, I also did not want to, but someone really needed a good beating, so I had to fight. Furthermore, if we did not do that, they would probably send an army here directly. Since you don't care about this, what else can I do? The second sister said, feeling wronged. Perhaps we will only be able to see this side of second sister in front of the master, Yi Futian thought. The old man sighed and said, try not to fight anymore. I know. Zhuge Hui smiled and nodded. Master, now the Eastern Barren Territory is in a mess. Qin dynasty is wildly ambitious and has opened the tomb of their ancestors. Now, they even invited Donghua clan, Fuyun Sword clan, and Royal Xian Temple to enter the tomb and cultivate. If Qin dynasty really leads various forces in the Eastern Barren Territory and come here, what should we do? Gu Donglu asked. In the past, the master was absent, so he and Zhuge Hui managed everything in the cottage and made decisions themselves. Now the master was back, so he obviously had to ask the master for his opinions. I don't even understand why they are fighting for a place like the Eastern Barren Territory. The old man shook his head. While I was outside, I heard that the Lu Kingdom was destroyed. Futian, a few descendants of Lu Kingdom are good friends with you, right? Are they the two people just now? Yup, Fei Yong and Qin Yu are my friends. I knew them before entering the cottage. Yi Futian nodded. How miserable. The old man shook his head and said, power and desire always blind people. In the past, I have warned you that because of your strength, you will naturally want to kill and have more desires. In the future, you must always remind yourself that the stronger you become, the more you should try keeping to your original self. Yes, everyone nodded. When they entered the cottage, the master had already reminded them about this. This time he was probably telling it to Yi Futian. Dong Lu, it's especially for you. You're too incisive and penetrating, the old man said to Gu Donglu. You should learn from your big brother. Over the years, I have been going to Sword Saint Mountain regularly to learn from him, Gu Donglu nodded. However, I still feel that if we encounter a force like Qin dynasty, one that would kill others easily to satisfy their own desires, we need to stop them by destroying them. If you are slightly stronger, I think you would have gone to Qin dynasty directly, right? The old man asked, looking at Gu Donglu. Gu Donglu remained silent. There were too many unfairness in the world and it was impossible for him to intervene with everything. The Lu Kingdom did not have much of a relationship with the cottage, and what happened to it was quite irrelevant to them. However, their destruction happened right before everyone, and in particular, it affected the cottage disciples negatively. Hence, murderous thoughts began to develop in Gu Dongliu's mind. Thus, when Qin Gu, a prince of Qin dynasty, came to Book Mountain for Yi Wuchen, Gu Donglu killed all the people from Qin dynasty. This was his sharpness. It is reasonable to stop their killing by killing them. I can't say that you're wrong. However, the people who have decided to eliminate the Lu kingdom are still the higher-ups in Qin dynasty. In every force, there are people of different kinds. For example, every member of the Qin dynasty has his own family and children. If we destroy the whole dynasty, how many innocent people will die? How will it be any different from the destruction of Lu kingdom? The old man seemed to have turned more solemn. He continued in a serious tone, if one day, you can kill anyone with the sword in your hand, and you stop any unfairness you come across by killing the wrong party, how much blood will stain your hands? Moreover, even if you destroy the Qin dynasty, there will be a second Qin dynasty in the future. The world of cultivation is always like this. He who gains power gains desires. Stopping their killing by killing them will never change anything. Master, therefore you always teach us that humans are unpredictable. The only person who can change all these is the one who sets the rules, Gu Donglu said. I have just returned. Let's not talk about such a serious topic. 5. Is the food ready? The old man shouted, smiling. Yes. Master, you should eat first. Luo Fan and Shui Yi started to serve the dishes. Master, eat more. Zhuge Hui helped the master to fill his bowl, while Beitang Xinger also served the master. Hearing the conversation between the master and third brother, Yi Futian had many thoughts in his mind. Qin dynasty was like this because the people who set the rules within the Qin dynasty were like this. According to ancient books, 300 years ago the divine prefectures of the East were in a total mess. Peace returned only after Donghuang the Great and Emperor Yi Qing unified the world. Many schools and academies were built. That was why his hometown Qingzhou had Qingzhou Academy. However, even so, both Qingzhou Academy and Donghai Academy were filled with people with various selfish desires. Gumu from Qingzhou Academy and School of the Emperor's Star in Donghai Academy were all like this. In any case, real emperors were still the people who could influence the world. Now, the master had established the cottage in the eastern barren territory which only had a few disciples. Perhaps, he was trying to build a different kind of place. Chapter 366, Arriving in Moon Clan. Chapter 366, Arriving in Moon Clan. Luo Fan and Shui Yi finished cooking. Everyone ate while chatting. Girl, you've comprehended a bit of saintly will? The old man said. Yes. Zhuge Hui nodded. Yes, but I don't seem able to make the step. It's not easy. As the ancient books say, a saint knows the world and all creatures. He has an open heart. That is why I tell you all that you should cultivate your heart as well. Your heart has nothing to do with your plane, but it can determine your level. Some do not have great talents but have an extraordinary heart. Thus, they can still reach extremely high planes. In contrast, if your heart is not enough, your limit is already determined, no matter how talented you are. The elder spoke while eating. Yi Futian and the others listened carefully. No wonder his senior brothers and sisters respected their teacher so much. He wasn't very attractive, he looked careless and even a bit trashy, but when he spoke seriously, he was like a true master. Teacher said before that a saint isn't only a saint in their cultivation plane, Zhuge Hui said seriously. In that case, why can evil people reach this level too? Yi Futian had never seen his second senior sister ask for advice so seriously. This was the first time. An evil person doesn't necessarily have a closed heart, the elder said. Everyone holds onto their own views and has their own desires based on that. You may think he is evil, but in his eyes, his actions are just. For example, many people think that there are too many cultivators in the world. They think the resources are limited and should belong to the strong cultivators. Those who aren't ambitious are like ants who shouldn't be pitted. The weak should become slaves. Do you agree? Everyone started pondering about the teacher's words. They seemed simple but were actually quite deep. Of course not, Zhuge Hui said. There are many forces in the divine prefecture. For example, the top forces of the Eastern Barren Territory take up different types of cultivation resources. A regular person isn't even able to find a simple battle technique. If they aren't lucky, they will be ordinary for their entire life. Not everyone in the world can find a good teacher. Everyone nodded, agreeing with their second senior sister. Her words resonated with Yi Futian deeply. He'd started in Qingzhou City of the Hundred Lands. The people of Qingzhou didn't even know what the outside world was like. How could they compare in worldview and resources? I won't find it strange if other people think like this, but I'm surprised you think this way. The elder smiled at Zhuge Hui. Then, let me ask you, would you like for everyone in the world to have equal resources or for only you all to be part of the cottage? Zhuge Hui obviously understood what he was saying. She also knew that equality didn't exist in the world. All forces would only choose the most talented. Oftentimes, one's birth decided their starting point. Emperors and saints are only human. No one can think all this through. Many times, people will treat something differently if they look from a different angle. Thus, I hope that none of you will go to the extreme. Only someone with an open heart can see the world clearly. I cannot teach everyone in the world, so I chose you all. In the future, each of you will influence more people. For example, your first senior brother established the Sword Saint Mountain. That is heritage too. Those who are talented and work hard will naturally receive more. However, those with ordinary talents should be treated equally as well. At least, no one has the right to rob them of their efforts to change their fates. The elder continued, back then, the divine prefecture was in chaos. The weak were treated like ants. The two emperors ruled the world and taught them the way, establishing academies. This gave everyone an equal chance. Everyone had the chance to change their fate. Yi Futian seemed to understand. It was too complicated. The elder chuckled. I'm off topic again. In the future, you'll have more thoughts after leaving the Eastern Barren Territory. My third, fourth, and fifth disciples, tell me about your cultivation. Did you slack off while I wasn't here? Teacher, I am untalented and only entered the grade 1 noble plane, Gu Donglu said. Yi Futian looked at him speechlessly. Was he seriously calling himself untalented, while in grade 1 noble plane? When Gu Donglu fought with Lu Nantian at the beginning of the year, he was still in grade 2. It seemed that the battle had helped him improve a lot. I am in grade 4, Shui said. Teacher, I'm in the middle tier, though only grade 6, Luo Fan said with a smile. Teacher, I'm still in the lower arcana plane, Beitang Xing'er mumbled. I'm in upper arcana plane. Yi Shaoshi scratched his head. Yu Sheng and I broke into the arcana plane on Sky Mountain, Yi Futian said, smiling. Would the teacher praise him for entering the arcana plane before he turned 20? You're almost 20 years old and only just entered the arcana plane. The elder stared at Yi Futian with an exaggerated expression. Yi Futian blinked. Teacher, I'm only turning 20 next year. That doesn't matter. Xing'er is younger than you, but her plane is higher. I don't know how you're cultivating, the man said mercilessly. But thankfully, you're lucky. You aren't as talented, but I'm your teacher. You still have a chance. Yi Futian wanted to argue, but he saw that Zhuge Hui was smiling at him and Gu Donglu looked serious. His temper died out. They'd told him before to respect the teacher. But his talent had been looked down on. Teacher, what plane are you in? Yi Futian asked curiously. I don't cultivate. The elder shook his head. Teacher, do you think I'll believe that? Yi Futian asked. Didn't you see at Sky Mountain? Did the bell have any effect on me? The man continued. Yi Futian froze. He hadn't thought of this, but it seemed to make sense now. Maybe it's because your plane is too high. Yi Futian asked, blinking. You think so? The man ate with his head down. He didn't look like it. Yi Futian was confused. So was he wrong and the teacher really didn't know how to cultivate? Yi Shaoshi tried not to laugh. Ever since Yi Futian came, his status had been dropping. Now, the teacher was back and this guy would finally get a taste of things. Ha! Even though your cultivation is low and you aren't talented, don't give up. I'm done eating, so you can come with me. I'll teach you well. I treat all my students equally. The man stood up and dusted himself. Ah! Yi Futian was perplexed. You aren't coming, the man said, walking away with his hands behind his back. Yi Futian scratched his head. He glanced at his seniors and saw them all looking at him, so he stood up. Yi Shaoshi finally couldn't keep his laughter in. The day had finally come. But then everyone turned to look at him and Yi Shaoshi felt that the mood was strange. Seeing all their strange eyes, he froze and looked to Yi Futian. Wait for no, Yi Shaoshi mumbled. Teacher just came back and he's going to help Junior. Since when was the teacher so diligent? You finally realized? Beitang Xing'er asked. Yi Shaoshi went completely blank. What was happening? Shaoshi, you can't figure out the teacher, Zhuge Hui said, chuckling. She obviously knew Yi Shaoshi had been gloating. In the Moon Clan, it was the annual banquet for testing the accomplishments of the disciples for this year. Right now, it was very lively. Many beauties were together, all looking to the beautiful battle before them. Both sides of the battle were gorgeous. One was Chu Yaoyao, the virgin of the Moon Clan. The one fighting her was equal in both looks and talent. It was Hua Jieyu who had been cultivating at the Xiaoye house. After returning from the 100 Lands, Hua Jieyu had been working hard. She'd improved greatly and was now in the Arcana plane. Yao Yao hadn't improved a lot this year. What happened? Someone asked. Chu Yao Yao was at this level last year and was still here now. Many people nodded. Maybe it was because of her relationship with Qinli that caused her to slack in cultivation. Otherwise, no matter how talented Hua Jieyu was, she couldn't catch up in 1 year. Right now, a muffled grunt came from the battlefield. A spell hit Chu Yao Yao. Just as she was about to escape, endless vines restrained her, anchoring her to the ground. Before her, Hua Jieyu stood with a crown. She was as brilliant as a queen. That was her life spirit. Powerful spiritual strength radiated from her, influencing her every attack. Defeated. Chu Yao Yao looked depressed. She'd lost to the beautiful girl before her. Hua Jieyu retracted her spell and gazed at Chu Yao Yao. Not wanting to compete, she'd only wanted to cultivate quietly before. But she couldn't forget how Yi Futian had been treated when he came last time. She didn't want Yi Futian to go through that if he came to find her again. Thus, she had to compete. The surrounding people fell quiet. They knew what it meant if Chu Yao Yao lost. Many people looked over to the leader of the Moon Clan. She had witnessed this herself. Hua Jieyu will replace Chu Yao Yao as the virgin, she said. The crowd was in an uproar. How long had Hua Jieyu been here? She'd already replaced Chu Yao Yao. At this time, people from the distance were hurrying over. Goddess Wang Yue looked over and asked, "What's going on?" As soon as she spoke, she looked to the distance. There was a powerful aura coming from there. Qin Yu of the Qin dynasty has come for a visit, a voice said. A short while later, Qin Yu arrived with a dragon. He looked down at Goddess Wang Yue and smiled. I'm sorry for the disturbance. Please forgive me. Chapter 367, Mockery. Chapter 367, mockery. Everyone in the Moon Clan looked up at the incoming figure. Their expressions changed slightly. Qin Yu came with a dragon without any prior notification. Standing arrogantly in the air, he was being very impolite. He wasn't the only one here either. There were also various dragons and strong cultivators. The people of the Moon Clan instantly felt pressure. The Qin dynasty wanted to ally with the entire eastern barren territory against the cottage. They wanted to become the king. If not for the Sword Saint's arrival months ago at the banquet, the alliance would have been formed already. Now, the Futian Sword Clan and Royal Xian Temple were apparently fully allied with the Qin dynasty. In this situation, the Moon Clan naturally wished to remain neutral, but it seemed difficult now. Since the Crown Prince is here, please take a seat. Goddess Wang Yue's voice was gentle and her eyes were calm. No one could guess what she was thinking, but actually, she was sighing inwardly too. The three top forces of the center were already at the peak. Now, two were allied and the Qin dynasty had excavated their ancestral tomb. There would be no suspense if they attacked the Moon Clan. The Lu Kingdom had set the example. No need. I came today to say something, Qin Yu said nonchalantly. He made a direct rejection and remained in the air, looking down at Goddess Wang Yue. Many Moon Clan disciples were upset at this. Their pretty eyes turned cold, but no one dared to do anything. The Qin dynasty wouldn't dare to do this to the cottage. When Qin Gu had brought his men to the cottage, Gu Donglu had killed them all outside Book Mountain. That had been so powerful. Sometimes, people envied how free and chivalrous the cottage could be. Even their enemies probably both feared and respected them. Crown Prince, please speak, Goddess Wang Yue said calmly. Chu Yao Yao. Qin Yu's cold gaze fell to Chu Yao Yao, who was still on the battle platform. Yi Futian killed my son Qin Li on Sky Mountain. You are his fiancé. Why did you just stand there? Chu Yao Yao's face paled instantly. What must come would always come. Many people had seen Qin Li die before her. She couldn't refute Qin Yu's accusations. Everyone in the Moon Clan looked to her. All the pressure in the world fell onto her at this moment. Why aren't you speaking? Invisible might came from Qin Yu's body. I cannot explain, Chu Yao Yao said, looking up. Qin Yu's expression turned frigid. Did she think that was enough? The Moon Clan did not wish to see the death of the royal grandson, Goddess Wang Yue said. I can understand your feelings too. However, Yi Futian is responsible. You should go to him, rather than take your anger out on a woman. I naturally won't take my anger out on an unrelated person, Qin Yu said. However, she is my son's fiancée, but she didn't do anything. She didn't kill Yi Futian even after he lost the ability to fight. I have to suspect her. My son is dead but the marriage still stands. Chu Yao Yao is still the daughter-in-law of the Qin dynasty. Goddess, you won't mind if I take her to the Qin dynasty, right? Everyone in the Moon Clan was aghast. Since Qin Li was dead, the marriage naturally should be cancelled. But Qin Yu still wanted to take Chu Yao Yao away. He clearly didn't want to forgive her. They didn't know how she would be treated if she really went to the Qin dynasty. Qin Yu would do whatever he wished. Crown Prince, don't you think your words are a bit bizarre? Goddess Wang Yue said. He is dead but the marriage still stands. So are you saying that if my son is dead, there's no need to search for the reason? There is no need to investigate what his fiancée did either. The dragon under Qin Yu huffed. He stood on the dragon's head and his voice grew colder. Invisible might radiated from him. It seemed that if the Moon Clan dissatisfied him today, he would attack directly. The Moon Clan all looked uncomfortable. Chu Yao Yao looked around. She knew that they couldn't save her. Since Qin Yu had brought his men here, the result was already decided. Who in the Eastern Barren Territory could counter the Qin dynasty other than the cottage? I'll go, Chu Yao Yao suddenly said. Her pretty eyes were determined. When she spoke, she looked relieved. She had chosen this path. Since it was the wrong path, she would pay for it. She naturally had her own motives when she'd accepted Qin Li's pursuit. Now, she had to bear the consequences. Hearing Chu Yaoyao's words, many people went to look at her. She smiled faintly as if she didn't really care. Looking up at Qin Yu, she said, I am willing to go to the Qin dynasty with you. Qin Li's death has nothing to do with me and I couldn't kill Yi Futian, but all of this is meaningless. I'll go with you. With that, she rose into the air. She looked down at Hua Jieyu with some envy. A dragon moved forward to take her. However, Qin Yu didn't show any sign of leaving. Goddess Wang Yue gazed at him. Anything else we can help you with? There is indeed. It is my main reason for coming, Qin Yu said. Goddess, I've heard of you and look up to you. I didn't come here today just for myself. I also bring the wishes of my father and the leaders of the Donghua clan and Fuyun clan to invite you to join us in ruling the Eastern Barren territory. Since he came, he must take care of Chu Yaoyao's matter. However, he wouldn't do all this just for her. The one he wanted to kill was Yi Futian, he wanted to destroy the cottage. I do not have that ambition. Crown Prince, please tell Emperor Qin and the other clan leaders that I must disappoint them. Goddess Wang Yue's voice was gentle. The cottage is unjust and murders the innocent. Many royal lives of the Qin dynasty were lost in their hands. The Eastern Barren territory will attack them together. Goddess, you are one of the leaders of a top force. How can you sit without doing anything? Qin Yu continued, Goddess, do not worry. To show our sincerity, we wish to have a marriage alliance. My son is dead, but there are still many excellent juniors. Coincidentally, the Moon clan chose a new virgin today. She can marry into the Qin dynasty. What do you think? The disciples of the Moon clan stared. This was Qin Yu's true motive today. He wanted to force the Moon clan to choose. As for the marriage, it was even more of a joke. They were sure that Qin Yu knew who the new virgin was. The only reason he wanted to take Hua Jieyu away was to provoke Yi Futian. Relatives shouldn't be involved in these things. Hua Jieyu was only a girlfriend and was also a disciple of a top force. Qin Yu's words were extremely impolite, even a bit insulting. He was clearly pressuring the Moon clan, wanting to take over them. Further, it wasn't just the Qin dynasty pressuring the Moon clan now. It was the alliance of 4 top forces. If they agreed, they would live. If they refused, they would die. The Moon clan was facing what the Lu kingdom had faced. Last time, the Qin dynasty found an excuse to attack. This time, they were even more direct. The Qin dynasty was stronger now too. They wanted to destroy 2 top forces in a row. They were so cruel. Hua Jieyu gazed at Goddess Wang Yue. Obviously, she wouldn't go with Qin Yu. Goddess Wang Yue fell silent. Then she looked to Qin Yu and said, the Moon clan doesn't wish to be involved in the rivalry between the Qin dynasty and cottage. Hua Jieyu is our virgin. I will ask of her opinion on the marriage. If you have nothing else to say, please return. She rejected him. All Moon clan disciples present held their breaths. An invisible force enveloped them. They knew what Goddess Wang Yue's rejection meant. It was highly possible they couldn't bear the consequences. Goddess, do you not care about justice? Qin Yu asked coldly. He scanned the others and said, I believe that not everyone in the Moon clan is as confused as Goddess Wang Yue. Does anyone wish to accomplish something great with the Qin dynasty? Many hearts trembled. Before the Qin dynasty destroyed the Lu kingdom, they'd separated many lords and officials of the Lu kingdom. Apparently, those traitors were in charge of the current Lu kingdom. Now, Qin Yu clearly wanted to attack the Moon clan. He asked who wished to follow them to divide them. Junior sister, the crown prince's words aren't completely illogical, someone suddenly said. It was Yan Feihong, leader of the Qianyue pavilion, master of Chu Yaoyao. Her status was very high. She was Goddess Wang Yue's senior sister. Goddess Wang Yue gazed at Yan Feihong, her eyes turning cold. Yan Feihong's eyes flitted away. She didn't dare meet Goddess Wang Yue's eyes. Though she was older, her junior sister was more excellent and had a very decisive personality. However, faced with the Qin dynasty's pressure, the Moon clan had no other choices. She had to think for herself. Senior Yan knows how valuable justice is. People like you should be the leader of the Moon clan, Qin Yu said. Anyone else? Shut up, Goddess Wang Yue said coldly to Qin Yu. As soon as she spoke, the air turned chillier. Qin Yu's smile froze. He stared down at Goddess Wang Yue. He grasped the dragon spear and a dragon's image wrapped around the tip. Goddess Wang Yue stood up. Her robes fluttered without any wind. She wasn't young, but she only looked around 30 years old. Her aura was cold and cool. She had once been the beauty of the Eastern Barren Territory, but she was still single now. Qin Yu, how did you feel to be whipped like a dog by the cottage's second disciple at the foot of Sky Mountain? Goddess Wang Yue mocked. The one who killed your son is Yi Futian of the cottage. You don't dare go to him, so you come to flaunt your power here. Don't you think it is embarrassing for someone so cowardly to become the king of the Eastern Barren Territory? Since they would fight, there was no need to be polite. As the goddess Wang Yue, she was as pure as jade. But this didn't mean that she was soft. Chapter 368, Sister-in-Law. Chapter 368, Sister-in-Law. In the silence, only Goddess Wang Yue's voice could be heard. Qin Yu froze, but then a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. People of the Moon clan were also stunned. They didn't expect that their gentle and beautiful fairy would scold Qin Yu in such a tone, but her emotional outburst was understandable. The Qin dynasty was really rude and unreasonable. Everyone in the Eastern Barren Territory all knew the dispute between the Qin dynasty and the cottage. But the Qin dynasty had been balking at confronting with the cottage. They knocked down the Lu kingdom only to show their strength. Now they planned to get the Moon clan involved in this dispute. The air grew oppressive. Qin Yu and Goddess Wang Yue gazed at each other coldly. Some people came from the Moon Tower and descended beside the ferry. Though the head of the Moon clan, Goddess Wang Yue's seniority in the clan was not very high. Among those comers, many were her seniors. It is surprising to know that Goddess Wang Yue is so resolute. Qin Yu suddenly laughed scornfully. What a shame! You have so many disciples here. Let me ask again. Whoever follows the Qin dynasty can be exempted. Qin Yu glanced at the crowd. Many wavered. Yan Feihong stepped forward and spoke up, I would like to follow the Qin dynasty. Would anyone like to join me? Hearing her words, many people rose up, including a few talented disciples. Master Yan. Chu Yaoyao looked at Yan Feihong in disappointment. Yan Feihong, does the Moon clan not treat you well? An old lady questioned her coldly. Senior, this is the only way out. Going against the trend is no good for the Moon clan. Can you persuade them? I don't want to see them die, Yan Feihong responded. Good. At least I know what kind of people you are now. When the clan is in danger, you cower and even betray the clan. There is no need for such kind of people to stay anymore. Goddess Wang Yue didn't care about the betrayal. She looked at her people and sighed. As the head of the Moon clan, I always choose to stay away from the chaotic of the Eastern Barren Territory. But there are always some people who just want to provoke me. You know this is inevitable. Why do you still choose this way? In the air, Qin Yu held his threatening long spear in hand. The long spear spun and dragon's roar was heard. Qin Yu, you think you are the smartest in the Eastern Barren Territory? No. Others just won't do it in your ways. You want us to get involved in this war? Okay, I'll satisfy you, Goddess Wang Yue said apathetically. Qin Yu didn't say anything else. The Qin dynasty, Donghua clan, Futian sword clan, and the royal Xian temple had allied. The cottage was their only concern. The Moon clan was so rebellious. In that case, he would exterminate this rebellious clan. The long spear emitted blazing golden light in the air. Numerous mighty dragons surrounded Qin Yu. Suddenly, some soaring sharp sword will appeared beside him. Obviously, the Qin dynasty was not the only comer. It seems that both the Futian sword clan and royal Xian temple chose to be loyal dogs. How pathetic it is. Goddess Wang Yue scorned. She distinguished the 3 lords of the Futian sword clan as well as the 3 heads of the royal Xian temple. With them, Qin Yu was definitely a far more powerful force than what the Lu kingdom had confronted with before. It was obvious that the Qin dynasty had learned a lesson from the fight with the Lu kingdom. At that time, if Emperor Lu was not absent, Qin Yu's group might not have defeated the Lu kingdom so easily. All the disciples of the Moon clan could feel the predicament they were in. At this time, Goddess Wang Yue rose into the sky. An enormous Kuanpeng appeared behind her, overshadowing the sky. When the Kuanpeng appeared, an extremely icy breath rolled over. All the steam in the air liquefied into a substantial rain. A rainstorm suddenly came to the Moon clan. The Kuanpeng was Goddess Wang Yue's life spirit. With her level, her life spirit had grown very mighty and condensed into substantial giant Kuanpeng. Since Kunpengs evolved from fish, they had both strong spells of wind and water. Goddess Wang Yue was at the top of the noble plane, almost becoming a sage. Controlling the forces of nature like rain and wind was very easy to her. A crescent moon loomed behind the fairy at this time, reflecting the vast space like an ancient mirror. This was her second life spirit. It's the moon mirror. Qin Yu looked at that dharma that included the Moon clan's heirloom. The moon mirror was the origin of the Moon clan's name. The moon mirror was a sage-level ritual implement. Every top force's creation had a story. The thriving of the Lu kingdom was because of the Saint Turtle, whereas the Moon clan became a top force because of this ritual implement. Be careful. Let me fight with her, Qin Yu said seriously. Goddess Wang Yue with the moon mirror was a great threat to him. Though not having been in a battle for a long while, Goddess Wang Yue was known to be best at a one versus many fight. Right now, Goddess Wang Yue looked more beautiful and extraordinary like a snow goddess. Her beautiful cold eyes peered at the sky and then beams of moonlight swept through behind her. Raindrops in the air were all frozen into ice. In an instant, extremely cold air covered this place. The world turned snow-white. The dragons around Qin Yu growled. Their enormous bodies gradually froze. The strong cultivators on dragons also felt their mentality froze. Soon, their bodies were turned into ice sculptures. This was Ice Sorrow, a spell mixing cold ice spell with spiritual energy. Qin Yu's body emitted the sharp aura of the gold attribute. He rode his dragon and rushed downward. He slashed the spear down. Those dragons around him were covered with snow but still moved on. Qin Yu rushed toward the fairy-like gold lightning. Among the people here, only he was at the same level as Goddess Wang Yue. The masters from the Futian sword clan and the royal Xian temple were all weaker. Without the help of a sage-level ritual implement, others couldn't be Goddess Wang Yue's match at all. Qin Yu had to deal with this himself. Though they had the advantage in number, Goddess Wang Yue could still very possibly win with the ritual implement. Qin Yu was good at martial arts while Goddess Wang Yue only cultivated sorcery. To get closer to her would definitely be best for Qin Yu. The Kuanpeng rushed toward the dragon. Goddess Wang Yue gazed at Qin Yu. The moon behind her melted with the ritual implement and sent blazing lights toward Qin Yu. Trembling, Qin Yu held his mentality and a suit of resplendent armor appeared on his body. The freezing attributes couldn't stop him anymore. He rushed down toward the fairy. At this time, a pair of ice wings appeared behind Goddess Wang Yue like the Kuanpeng's wings. She gathered the attribute of wind and then a violent tornado moved toward Qin Yu. She quickly rose up higher at an amazing speed. Qin Yu ripped apart the tornado. He glanced at the fairy up in the sky and sneered. Goddess Wang Yue was good at the wind attribute, of course, he couldn't catch up with her. But if the fairy chose to escape, she couldn't protect others. They would be killed. Bang! An extremely keen intent burst out. A glaring golden light fell down and covered the whole Moon Clan. At this moment, all people of the Moon Clan were terrified. Goddess Wang Yue was the only one that could confront Qin Yu. At this time on another battleground, a strong cultivator of the Royal Xian Temple went down to Hua Jieyu. Hua Jieyu's face changed a little. With wind sorcery, she escaped, but the enemy in the noble plane. How could she escape? She was caught soon. Suddenly, a glaring light came from afar. It was as fast as lightning. Even the air was quaking. Whoosh! The noble who caught Hua Jieyu was split into two. That glaring light stopped and stayed above Hua Jieyu's head. A shrill sound was heard from the light and a horrible image loomed. It was Broadsword Will. Seeing there was still someone rushing toward Hua Jieyu, that broadsword will turned into lightning again and split the comber. Blood splashed in the air. Those coming noble cultivators were killed one by one. Then the broadsword will rushed toward Qin Yu. He waved his long spear and pierced toward the lightning. The lightning was diminished but Qin Yu's face paled. In the Eastern Barren territory, only one person could send such violent broadsword will. He turned around and peered at the distant. A figure in black stepped out. He moved slowly but it only took him several steps to the battlefield. The person looked at Hua Jieyu but Hua Jieyu hadn't figured out what had just happened. The man in black had just saved her, but she didn't know who he was. How was he so powerful? His appearance stopped the battle abruptly but naturally. My sister-in-law, are you okay? The man in black smiled at Hua Jieyu. Hua Jieyu blinked. Sister-in-law. She quickly figured out the comber's status. Since she was his sister-in-law, he must be a disciple of the cottage. Among the disciples of the cottage, only one person was good at the broadsword. Thinking of this, Hua Jieyu smiled. She didn't expect that Yi Futian's senior brother would come. My greetings, Senior Sword Saint. Hua Jieyu bowed slightly. The Sword Saint was a legend of the Eastern Barren territory. Senior Sword Saint. The Sword Saint shook his head with a smile. I'm Yi Futian's senior brother. You can call me that too. Oh. Hua Jieyu nodded slightly and called, Senior brother. Good. The Sword Saint nodded slightly and looked at Goddess Wang Yue. Goddess Wang Yue floated in the air. She looked at the Sword Saint and said, It seems that you were right. Though our teacher is busy, he is always concerned with us, the Sword Saint said. After the bell on Sky Mountain tolled and all forces went back, the teacher found him and asked him to visit the Moon Clan. Actually, he had been living below the Moon Clan's mountain for a few days. Goddess Wang Yue had met him before. The Moon Clan didn't want to get involved. He respected her choice, so he just lived there. Chapter 369, Move Clan. Chapter 369, Move Clan. Qin Yu and the other strong cultivators looked at the Sword Saint with uncomfortable expressions. They'd brought people from 4 top forces, overestimating the Moon Clan's power. But they didn't expect that the Sword Saint would be here too. They had strength in numbers, but the top force determined everything. If either the Sword Saint or Goddess Wang Yue went after Qin Yu, no one could stop the other. The Sword Saint had killed countless nobles with a bit of broadsword will. Goddess Wang Yue, Qin Yu said coldly, you didn't want to enter the battle because you've already become allied with the cottage. Goddess Wang Yue gazed at him coldly. The Sword Saint had chatted with her before. She didn't wish to enter this storm and wanted to stay neutral. However, the Sword Saint didn't like this. He thought that the Qin dynasty would come. And just as he'd predicted, the Sword Saint really did come. She couldn't even take a step back. If she didn't agree, her clan would be destroyed. In that case, she could only join the battle. Their safety is on you. Goddess Wang Yue looked down. Her life spirit flashed, shining onto Qin Yu. He was instantly isolated. A cold intent seeped into his bones. The spell Ice Sorrow was cast again. This time, it was targeted at Qin Yu alone instead of the group. Qin Yu felt his spiritual energy about to be frozen. Both his senses and movements slowed down. Iciness attacked him, about to cover his body. Dazzling golden light shone. His body seemed to turn to gold like he was a god of war. Endless light shot through everything, roaring in the world of ice and snow, tearing the iciness. Goddess Wang Yue reached out, closing her eyes. The entire world seemed to slow. Boom! A shocking windstorm was born. A boundless hurricane enveloped her and Qin Yu. If one looked down from the air, they would see a vortex of wind. Goddess Wang Yue melded into the windstorm and circled around Qin Yu incredibly fast. Qin Yu held his dragon spear in preparation. He was a powerful martial arts cultivator and had extreme power. However, Goddess Wang Yue was a pure sorcerer. She couldn't fight him directly. That horrible windstorm spun crazily. Qin Yu felt that he was spinning with the air too. He couldn't see the outside world clearly. The Moon Clan looked up to the windstorm. It could destroy everything and rip this clan apart. But now, it rose up into the air, leaving the Moon Clan. It was clear that Goddess Wang Yue was worried this wild battle would hurt her disciples. For someone at the pinnacle like Qin Yu, no one could stop him if he wanted to kill. She could only move the battleground. As for the Moon Clan, she handed it to the Sword Saint. She clearly trusted him more than she trusted herself. She believed the Sword Saint could protect the Moon Clan more. Thus, she brought Qin Yu away. The Sword Saint looked up to the sky. Broadsword will filled the sky, coming out of his body and going in many directions. Gradually, the entire air was sliced by them. Die, he uttered coldly. As soon as he spoke, those beams of broadsword will transformed into bolts of lightning. They shot across the sky. Dragons roared, the broadsword will cut, and the dragons were split apart, crying out. Powerful nobles used their spells to fight back, but the broadsword will seemed undefeatable. There were various squelches. People in the sky were continuously sliced, they couldn't fight back at all. Sorcery and sword light cut towards the Sword Saint and the Moon Clan at the same time. Stand there and don't move, the Sword Saint said to the Moon Clan disciples who wanted to fight. He shot into the air, grasping a bit of broadsword will, cutting through the air. The broadsword intent used his body as the core and spread out. Instantly, a dazzling broadsword enchantment shone in his surroundings. Endless sorcery and sword light shone down, trying to destroy the enchantment. Just then, beams of sword light descended like lightning. It drowned everything, almost breaking the air as it went straight to the Sword Saint. These were from the leaders of the Futian sword clan. The Sword Saint looked but didn't move. Beams of sword will cut down, blasting on his body. However, terrifying broadsword light flowed across his body, almost transforming into solid armor. Sharp sword aura descended but couldn't cut through the armor. There was a huge difference between someone almost in the sage plane and at the pinnacle of the noble plane. Retreat, the leaders of the Futian sword clan said. They knew that even if they had more people, the Sword Saint was enough by himself, even if he had to protect the Moon Clan too. People retreated hurriedly, soaring into the sky. I'd warned you at the Qin dynasty last time. Since you didn't listen, why don't you stay now, the Sword Saint said. The broadsword enchantment around him shrieked and transformed into boundless light. It broke through the air, chasing after the escaping figures. Hurry, someone yelled. They were fast, but the broadsword will was faster. It streaked across the sky, destroying all defensive spells. Many people became helpless. They watched the broadsword will descend and cut through their bodies. Faced with this sage broadsword light, they couldn't fight back at all. Only the leaders of the Futian sword clan could block the attack. But then, the sword saint's body seemed to transform into light. He was even faster than the broadsword will. Reaching out his right hand, dazzling light consolidated into a blade. No, someone yelled in fear when he saw the sword saint. However, the man didn't charge at him. He just walked past and halved the person. He wasn't the only one. When the sword saint walked past those escaping, blood would bloom in the sky. The strong cultivator with Chu Yao Yao twisted his features. Just as he wanted to kill Chu Yao Yao, the sword light descended. His dragon was killed and then it fell upon him. Chu Yao Yao fell down with the destroyed dragon's corpse. Looking at the sword saint who passed her, she felt reverence. With his sword, the nobles were like ants. He was so powerful. She thought she would die today. She didn't expect that she would be saved by Yi Futian's senior brother. Of course, she knew that the sword saint wasn't here for her. He was here for Yi Futian's lover. Hua Jieyu was at the Moon Clan. Dazzling sword light bloomed in the air, accompanied by fearful begs for forgiveness. Chu Yao Yao fell through the sky. She felt indescribable emotions as she looked up at that scene. Below her, the Moon Clan also saw that dazzling light. The sky seemed to be sliced apart. They felt yearning. Was this a truly top battle? A single man could destroy an entire army. Yan Feihong, a cold voice said. Then figures flashed, flying towards Yan Feihong. The sword saint didn't kill her. This was the private matter of the Moon Clan, so the clan would solve it. Yan Feihong's face paled instantly. She looked to the furious crowd around her. I was thinking for the Moon Clan too. Was I wrong? She asked. The clan leader knew that the sword saint was here. Why didn't she tell us? I knew, an old woman said. I saw the clan leader with the sword saint. He guessed that the Qin dynasty might attack the Moon Clan and asked for our opinion. The clan leader didn't wish to be involved. The sword saint was fair and respected our choice. However, he didn't leave, preparing to fight the Qin dynasty. If they didn't come, none of this would happen. If more people knew about this and the Qin dynasty heard about it, we would be forced to enter. Stop wasting time with her. Wait for the clan leader to return and punish her, others said. Yan Feihong's face was pale. In the air, the sword saint killed everyone and rose up again, going to another battlefield. He saw Goddess Wang Yue in the sky, but Qin Yu wasn't there. He escaped, Goddess Wang Yue said. He must have known that it would be dangerous once you were free, so he gave up. Yes. The sword saint nodded. Qin Yu had saintly ritual implements too. It would be hard for Goddess Wang Yue to keep him here. Thank you. After all, the cottage and Moon Clan didn't have much of a relationship. You're welcome. The Qin dynasty is working with everyone to attack the cottage. Helping you is helping the cottage, the sword saint said as they returned to the Moon Clan. However, the Moon Clan won't be safe anymore, he continued. Goddess Wang Yue knew this too. She gazed at the green mountains and smiled bitterly. Since the Qin dynasty is forcing the Moon Clan to choose, there's nothing else I can say. Is there room on Book Mountain? Welcome. The sword saint nodded with a smile. Looking down at the people, Goddess Wang Yue said, You have all seen what happened. There is no need for me to speak further. I will move the clan to Book Mountain. If anyone wishes to leave and stay away from this storm, I will not force you. Those who wish to go, please gather your belongings and get ready to leave. The Moon Clan was in an uproar, but they understood that their leader was helpless. They had no other choices. If not for the Sword Saint, the Moon Clan would have either gone to the Qin dynasty or been destroyed. Chapter 370, Wife. Chapter 370, Wife. Book Mountain, the cottage. On the ancient summit surrounded by clouds, there was a patch of emerald green grass, on which a handsome figure was sitting quietly. Beside him, there was a pile of books. The person was reading a book in silence at the moment. On a huge boulder not far behind him, an elder was lying down quietly. He was holding a wine pot in his hand, from which he would take a sip every now and then. He looked extremely leisurely. The two were obviously Yi Futian and his master Mr. Du. After finishing the book, Yi Futian closed his eyes. Immediately, spiritual qi around him resonated. Wind whizzed in the sky and the entire atmosphere turned tense. Accompanied by ear-piercing noises, many sharp wind blades appeared in space which seemed to be interwoven in a messy manner. They swept forward and even space itself seemed to be entangled. More amazingly, the wind blades which were charging forward slowly converged together, eventually forming a straight line. Boom! A loud noise erupted. A low mountain in the distance was cleaved into two pieces at the middle. The crack was as thin as a line and was hardly noticeable. The wind elemental spell was as sharp as a sword. Yi Futian opened his eyes, after which he started reading another book. "Master, little brother, mealtime," someone shouted from the distance. Yi Futian put down the book and turned his head. He saw Beitang Xinger walking towards him with a lunchbox. The old man on the huge boulder stood up. Smiling, he said, "Six, what good food is there today?" "Master, take a look yourself." Beitang Xinger jumped onto the boulder and opened the lunchbox. Then, she took out the rice and dishes. At once, the aroma of food spread out. Yi Futian also stood up and approached Beitang Xinger, feeling somewhat hungry. The old man glanced at Yi Futian and said lazily, "Who asked you to stop?" "Master, I have been practicing for quite long and feel really hungry now," Yi Futian said, feeling wronged. "Furthermore, I am almost done learning all the spells." "Oh, Xinger, later go to the book cave and pick some more spells for your brother to cultivate," the old man said, grinning. "Some more?" Yi Futian said with a long face. "Master, these spells are all quite ordinary and not very useful. Moreover, they're not very hard to learn." "Kid, what do you know? Reading a book is cultivation. It can allow you to find your true self. Just like the saying, the meaning of a book will become clear if you read it 100 times. You only know so few spells so far, and yet you claim that these are useless. Since you have decided to become a sorcerer, you must be adept at least 3,000 spells. Otherwise, don't call yourself a cottage disciple," Mr. Du said emotionlessly, but his hands had already started moving. As he ate and drank, he continued, "It's a rare chance that I am back, and I am using all my time on your cultivation. You don't know how much your brothers and sisters envy you. Master, I am willing to give this opportunity to them." Yi Futian was almost going to cry. 3,000 spells. I might as well die. Is this old guy going to ask me to cultivate all the spells in the book cave? I will die. Revenge, this is certainly revenge. No way. You are the youngest. I have taught all your brothers and sister before, so I cannot be biased. I am a man with principles, the old man said in a serious tone. It's fine. I don't mind, Yi Futian said. All right then. 6. In the future you will copy books with him. After your fourth brother started copying books, he has learned many spells. I think that it's really helpful, the old man said casually. Master, I'm wrong. I will continue to cultivate spells, Yi Futian cried. Beitang Xinger giggled, looking very charming. She looked at Yi Futian and said, Little brother, come and eat. The dishes are getting cold. Thank you, Sister Xinger. Yi Futian was touched. The two sisters were really good to him. Little brother, you should stop complaining. Second sister and third brother are all hoping that the master can spend more time teaching them. Beitang Xinger served the dishes to Yi Futian. Smiling gently, she continued, only after you learn many spells can you merge them and be an expert. You are talented in all elements, so you should naturally make full use of it. When you understand all spells, you can do whatever you want. You can cast spells simply with a thought. Listen to her. You are already not young. I really wonder how you used to cultivate in the past. Xing'er is younger than you, but she knows more than you. You are really hopeless. Luckily, you have met me, Mr. Du said as he ate. Yi Futian felt speechless. Just now, Mr. Du called him kid, and now he said that Yi Futian was not young. I am only repeating what you have taught me, Beitang Xing'er said. Yi Futian sighed. He felt unlucky that he had such a master. Master. From the distance, Yi Shaoshi also walked over. Noticing that Yi Futian and the master were eating together, he looked at Yi Futian in envy. It seemed indeed that fat people had no rights. Fat boy, what is it? The old man asked. Cough, cough. Yi Futian coughed and glanced at Yi Shaoshi. This nickname was fantastic. Yi Shaoshi widened his eyes at Yi Futian. He was brought to the cottage when he was young, and since then the master had been calling him fat boy. What could he do? Was it his mistake to be fat? Master, Goddess Wangyue had brought the disciples of Moon Clan here. She wants to see you, Yi Shaoshi said. Didn't your big brother come back as well? The old man asked. Nope. I think he should have returned to Sword Saint Mountain to prepare, Yi Shaoshi replied. At the moment, the situation in the Eastern Barren Territory was extremely unstable, so even Sword Saint Mountain was unsafe. Therefore, he naturally had to gather everyone together. Book Mountain was undoubtedly the safest place. Both the cottage and the college were situated here. The only place that Qin dynasty did not yet dare to attack was Book Mountain. Otherwise, they would have made their attack long ago. They were clearly not very confident. Beside them, Yi Futian's eyes glittered. Goddess Wangyue had led all the Moon Clan disciples here, so something bad must have happened in Moon Clan. The master indeed had some foresight. Qin dynasty still touched Moon Clan after all. However, since Big Brother had been ambushing there, Qin dynasty must have paid a huge price this time. Moon Clan was here, so obviously Jieyu was as well. I'm full. Master, I'll go and take a look. Yi Futian dashed out. Have your cultivation ended? The old man roared. Master, what are you saying? Yi Futian replied, but he was already very far away. Humph, easy. Didn't you say that you don't know cultivation? Then come and chase me. Look at how much he values his girlfriend over his master. Why did 3 take in such a disciple for me? The old man remarked, speechless. I totally agree. I think he should get some punishment. Yi Shaoshi added oil to the fire. All right. Fat boy, you can cultivate with him, the old man said casually. Yi Shaoshi immediately kept quiet. Ask your second sister to go. I'll go and chat with my senior, the old man said, after which he turned around and left. Yi Shaoshi nodded and went back. At the entrance of Book Mountain, the huge square was filled with beauties of various kinds. There were so many charming ladies that even the entrance to Book Mountain was blocked. This was definitely a feast to the eyes of the college disciples. Countless people from the college had come here after receiving the news and were enjoying the sight. So many beauties. I heard that in the future, the members of Moon Clan are going to cultivate on Book Mountain. I think so. I wonder if the chief is going to agree. Obviously he is going to agree. My mountain has a lot of empty space and can accommodate many of them. Same for my mountain. The entrance of Book Mountain became extremely lively. The members of the college were almost going to drool. The scene before them was too beautiful and dazzling. In the college, there were far more male disciples than female disciples, so they had never seen such a large group of pure beauties. They felt that they were already in heaven. It's my first time seeing Goddess Wang Yue. She indeed deserves the name of goddess, so pure and ethereal. That's the Virgin of Moon Clan, Chu Yao Yao. She is one of the top 3 beauties of the Eastern Barren Territory. And there, so many beauties. Who is that? Everyone turned to look in a particular direction. Not far behind Goddess Wang Yue, there was a lady who was about 19 years old. She was even prettier than Chu Yao Yao. Her face was stunning and flawless, and her skin was as smooth as jade. She was as exquisite as an elf. Yeah, who is that? Why have I never heard about her before? She is even more beautiful than Chu Yao Yao, so why is she not one of the top 3 beauties? Many people started discussing. The college disciples Tang Yi was also among the crowd. Knowing obviously who that lady was, he said, she is Hua Jieyu. Hua Jieyu seldom showed up in the Eastern Barren Territory, so not many knew her. Therefore, although her look was gorgeous, she was not as famous. Hua Jieyu, many people muttered. Then, they suddenly thought of a person, Hua Jieyu, Yi Futian's girlfriend. It seemed that they would not stand a chance at all. Suddenly, a person arrived at the place from the distance. Yi Futian landed on the ground and similarly felt somewhat dazzled. Greetings, goddess. Yi Futian bowed at Goddess Wang Yue, who was in front of the rest. I have heard your name many times. Indeed, you look extraordinary, Goddess Wang Yue said, smiling. She was being honest. Every cottage disciple was incredibly talented. Yi Futian was not yet 20, and yet his name had spread to every corner of the Eastern Barren Territory. Even Qin Li died to him. His future was certainly going to be bright and grand. Goddess, you flatter me. Yi Futian scratched his head as if he was feeling embarrassed. Then, he said softly, I'm here to see my wife. Wife? Goddess Wang Yue blinked. Then, she smiled and turned around to look at Hua Jieyu. Hua Jieyu's face blushed at once as she noticed that many people around her were staring at her. She widened her eyes at Yi Futian. Can't this guy keep a low profile? Yi Futian walked into the crowd and approached Hua Jieyu. Smiling, he said, Jieyu, I miss you so much. Hey, do you think that we are non-existent? Yunro, whom Yi Futian knew, said, smiling. Sister, in the future we will be a single family. Yi Futian grinned and looked at her, causing many Moon Clan members to laugh. Then, he reached out his hand towards Hua Jieyu's hand. Hua Jieyu dodged slightly, but then she allowed him to grab her hand. Another wave of uproarious talk and laughter erupted. What an animal! Seeing the scene, countless college disciples could feel their hearts bleeding. Suddenly, another group of people arrived at the place. It was Zhuge Hui and the rest. Zhuge Hui glanced at Yi Futian and smiled. This guy really could not keep a low profile. Chapter 371, Roar of the College Chief. Chapter 371, Roar of the College Chief. Noticing the scene before her, Chu Yao Yao lowered her head slightly. 1 year ago, she was still the genius of Moon Clan and really stood out among her peers. After knowing Qin Li, she had the chance to become the future masteress of Qin dynasty. However, as fate would have it, she fell in love with Yi Futian. Now, Hua Jieyu had replaced her as the Virgin of Moon Clan, and in addition, the entire Moon Clan came to the college. Hua Jieyu naturally took away all the attention that had once belonged to her. Thinking about this, Chu Yao Yao felt somewhat lost. Of course, nobody would care about her feelings at the moment. When Yi Futian appeared beside Hua Jieyu, she, one of the top 3 beauties, was almost non-existent. In the sky, Zhuge Hui smiled and glanced at Yi Futian. Then, she landed on the ground and said to Goddess Wang Yue, "Welcome to the college." "Excuse us for troubling you," Goddess Wang Yue said. "Master has gone to see the college chief." "Goddess, what are your plans?" Zhuge Hui asked. Mr. Du had gone to the college chief's place to discuss how they should handle the people from the Moon Clan. After all, Moon Clan was a large force, and its disciples were no fewer in number than the college. "I'll wait for Mr. Du's opinions," Goddess Wangyue said. Actually, Moon Clan was asking the college for help this time, so she would not request for anything else. However, the style of the college was completely different from the Qin dynasty. One could easily see this from Sword Saint's attitude. Goddess Wangyue had seen for herself how Zhuge Hui dealt with Qin Yu at the foot of Sky Mountain. This second disciple of the cottage was indeed an arrogant lady. However, at the moment she looked very mild, unlike Qin Yu who was always supercilious. "All right, I will stay here and accompany you," Zhuge Hui said, smiling. Suddenly, Yi Futian shouted, "Sister." Zhuge Hui smiled and looked at him. When Yi Futian said shyly, "Sister, can you help me to tell the master something?" Seeing Yi Futian's expression, Zhuge Hui immediately knew what he was thinking of. Grinning, she said, "Go and talk to the master yourself." Yi Futian had an ominous feeling. Will that old guy agree? He thought. Zhuge Hui widened her eyes at Yi Futian and said, "Did you make the master angry?" "Don't worry. The master will still agree to such a small request." "Thank you, sister." Yi Futian gave a bright smile. With these words from Zhuge Hui, he would not worry anymore. If that old guy did not agree, he would go and disturb second sister. The people from Moon Clan looked at Hua Jieyu in jealousy. It seemed like Jieyu was going to cultivate in the cottage. It was indeed good to have a relationship with Yi Futian. Anyhow, Hua Jieyu was the virgin of Moon Clan at the moment, so it would be a good thing for her to cultivate under Mr. Du. The first mountain in the college was also the highest summit on Book Mountain. On this particular summit, many ancient palaces stood within the clouds, producing an ethereal view. There were many wonderful caves there, all of which were blessed spots for cultivation. As the first mountain in the college, the facilities here were of the highest standards. Spiritual qi was abundant and there were many matrices on the summit, unlike the cottage which was very simple. Before a pavilion on the first mountain, there were two people. One of them was an elder in grey robes who had an outstanding temperament. He had long hair and a beard and looked divine. Beside him, there was a handsome young man. He was a disciple of the first mountain, Bai Lishu. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Senior." Then, an old man wearing simple clothes walked in directly and shouted at the elder in grey robes, "Senior, it has been many years. You still look energetic." The elder in grey robes glanced at the person who had just entered. With a cold face, he replied emotionlessly, "Do you still remember my existence?" What a rare sight. The elder in grey robes was the college chief, and the person who had just arrived was obviously Mr. Du. "Senior, what do you mean?" "When I am outside, I often think about you," Mr. Du said. "Is it?" The college chief still looked cold as he continued, "If so, why are you only visiting me now when you have returned a while ago?" "Is it because of Moon Clan?" "I came here to visit you." "Moon Clan is only a trivial, secondary matter," Mr. Du said. "Ha!" The college chief sneered. "Master, uncle, I'll leave first." Suddenly, Bai Lishu bowed at Mr. Du, after which he left the place. The resentment between his master and Mr. Du had existed for a long time. He did not know the exact reasons, but it was definitely something he should not get involved into. Furthermore, Mr. Du had always been very mysterious and would very rarely appear in the first mountain. Even he had only seen Mr. Du for a few times. "Senior, in these few years, the first mountain is becoming grander and more gorgeous. But I think you have too few disciples. It'll be better to have more people here," Mr. Du said softly. "I have enough disciples here." "In fact, how many people are there in the cottage?" "I think you will have no problems taking in an entire clan," the college chief sneered. Mr. Du had gathered the members of Moon Clan and wanted to give him everyone. "Senior, you know that I am lazy and not in the college most of the time." There are so many beautiful young girls here and I don't want to delay their cultivation. You are the ruler of Book Mountain, so naturally, you will arrange everyone from Moon Clan. I believe that with your words, all the mountain elders will cooperate as well, Mr. Du said. Moreover, we have a common enemy today. Senior, you cannot disappoint them. All right. Then we will distribute them equally onto the 9 mountains. The college chief stared at Mr. Du. Since the cottage did not want to take in disciples, he would give some people to them by force. No way. You have no idea what kind of people my disciples are. Their mouths are sweet, and they are good-looking and talented. They are just too outstanding, so something bad will happen. Don't count the cottage in, Mr. Du said, waving his hand. The college chief stared coldly at Mr. Du and said angrily, "Are the disciples in my first mountain not outstanding?" Senior, don't get angry. It's bad for you, Mr. Du advised. Senior, then it's all settled. Moon Clan is also a top force, and many great girls can cultivate with college disciples together in the future. They can have friendly fights with each other and improve as a whole. It will certainly motivate college disciples to work harder. You should organize a friendly competition once in a while. It will definitely be more effective than in the past. Wait, who agreed that it's all settled? The beard of the college chief danced in the air. He could not tolerate this anymore. Senior, if you insist on this I'll get angry, Mr. Du said, grinning. Seeing his expression, the college chief was even more furious. He said coldly, "So what? I am really angry." Mr. Du's smile grew brighter. You. The college chief pointed his finger at Mr. Du and said coldly, "Scram." Then it's all settled. Mr. Du smiled in satisfaction, after which he turned around and left. This is too much. The college chief's beard danced with the wind. It was ridiculous. Oh yeah. Mr. Du suddenly stopped. Turning around, he added, "My eldest disciple will also bring the people from Sword Saint Mountain here. Senior, you should also help to organize them at that time. The people from these 3 forces can have exchanges and improve together. For the college, I have also spent much time and effort." After he finished, he turned around and left casually. "Why don't you die outside that year?" the college chief roared, unable to control his anger. The people from Moon Clan, Sword Saint Mountain, and the college would be gathered together. There would be so many more issues for him to settle. That bastard, he can continue to drink and sleep in the cottage. Also, why do I have to manage the people of his eldest disciple? And his few disciples have never put the college in their hearts. Bai Li Shu, the college chief shouted. Bai Li Shu appeared beside him in a flash and said, "Master." He did not know why his master was so furious. It seemed that Mr. Du had enraged him again. "Go tell the few mountain elders to go down together and welcome the people from Moon Clan. Then distribute them into the few mountains," the college chief said angrily. "Master, how do we distribute them?" Bai Li Shu asked. "Settle it yourself." The college chief swung his sleeves and left. Bai Li Shu gave a bitter smile as he shook his head. He was so innocent. Book Mountain became busy again. The college disciples were all very excited. The members of Moon Clan were actually really distributed to the various mountains. In any case, the number of people who went to Mountain Elder Zhu Qing's mountain was the largest. After all, Zhu Qing was a lady and there were many female disciples under her, while all the disciples from Moon Clan were female. Chu Yaoyao chose that mountain as well. The other disciples also chose the most suitable mountain for them one after another. Although they felt somewhat awkward, they also anticipated cultivating with college disciples as they could have exchanges with each other and improve together. Book Mountain became lively. On the other hand, Goddess Wang Yue went to the cottage along with Zhuge Hui. Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were obviously with them as well. In the cottage, after Goddess Wang Yue saw Mr. Du, she saluted and said, "Greetings, Mr. Du." She saluted him like she was a junior. Even though rumors in the Eastern Barren territory claimed that Mr. Du could not cultivate, the first 3 disciples of the cottage were all at the same level as her. This legendary Mr. Du should clearly be respected. In addition, she was quite young, so it was all right for her to salute to a senior. You don't have to be so polite. You can treat Book Mountain like your home and do not have to be so restricted. Just behave like you are in Moon Clan, Mr. Du said, smiling. All right, Goddess Wang Yue nodded gently. Mr. Du, after the disturbance in the Eastern Barren territory. Don't worry. The college is not Qin dynasty, and I also do not want to unify the Eastern Barren territory. You don't need to think so much. Just take it like you are being a guest on Book Mountain for a while. Furthermore, you have also met with my eldest disciple. He will bring the people from Sword Saint Mountain here. My second and third disciples are also doing fine with their cultivation. When you have the chance, you can chat with them. You can come to the cottage at any time without restriction, Mr. Du said. Thank you, Mr. Du. Goddess Wang Yue stopped worrying. It seemed that Mr. Du indeed had no intentions of ruling the Eastern Barren territory. Jieyu, come and meet the master, Yi Futian suddenly said. Hua Jieyu nodded gently and said to Mr. Du, I am Hua Jieyu. Greetings, master. Mr. Du smiled and stared at Yi Futian, who smiled back nervously and scratched his head. Master, can Jieyu stay in the cottage and cultivate? Yi Futian asked. You have already asked her to call me master. How can I reject? Mr. Du widened his eyes at Yi Futian. Then he looked at Hua Jieyu and said, Girl, in the future, you can cultivate with me just like him. Meanwhile, you can help me to keep an eye on him. No problem. Hua Jieyu nodded, smiling, after which she stared at Yi Futian with a proud look. Yi Futian blinked his eyes. Whose master was this after all? Chapter 372, Training. Chapter 372, Training. After Moon Clan, Sword Saint Mountain also shifted entirely to Book Mountain. The whole Eastern Barren territory was astonished by this. As the 2 large forces moved to Book Mountain, a super being was born on Book Mountain, one formed from the college, Sword Saint Mountain, and the Moon Clan. More importantly, the Moon Clan was forced by Qin dynasty to move. Just like what happened on Book Mountain, Futian Sword Clan and Royal Xian Temple had also officially shifted to Qin dynasty. Clearly, these 2 forces knew that it would be a disaster for them should the cottage send Sword Saint to attack their clans, just like what Qin Yu had done to the Lu kingdom. How could they not guard against this? At the same time, the Qin dynasty had sent many people to watch over the places outside Book Mountain and in the ancient Barren territory to prevent the college from attacking them or Donghua clan suddenly. The Eastern Barren territory had entered an era where the 2 superforces stood opposite each other. This would be a key stage in the development of the Eastern Barren territory. Once one of the 2 forces won, it would very likely become the king of the Eastern Barren territory. The remaining 3 top forces, namely Qianqiu Temple, Witch Clan, and Ji family, did not dare to get involved easily, they just observed the situation carefully. Because of the Moon Clan's current situation, the Qin dynasty would naturally not deal with them anymore. Otherwise, they would probably achieve a directly opposite effect. That time Qin Yu decided to attack Moon Clan because the 4 major forces had already allied and they all thought that Moon Clan would be easily defeated. In addition, Qin Yu wanted to deal with Chu Yaoyao as well as Yi Futian by dealing with Hua Jieyu. Therefore, Qin Yu decided to go to the Moon Clan and eliminate them if they were disobedient. He did not expect Sword Saint to be waiting in ambush there. In that battle, a few summit lords from Futian Sword Clan and a few lords from Royal Xian Temple were killed, officially starting the prelude to the final battle. Thus all the forces chose to shift one after another. However, after the battle in the Moon Clan, both parties turned quiet instead. There had been no fights between them since then. It was said that the Qin dynasty was allowing the most powerful people from various forces to enter their tomb to cultivate and break through. Clearly, they wanted to end the era in a single battle. Book Mountain was also very lively. The three major forces had combined together and interesting events were happening every day. Many young people in the college became much more motivated to cultivate. Furthermore, many people from Moon Clan were also being pursued, especially the prettier ones. The last day of the 10,003rd year of the Divine Prefecture calendar approached quietly without any disturbances. In this year, too many major events had happened in the Eastern Barren Territory. The peaceful year-end drew a period to the entire year. Of course, it meant in no way that everything was ending. In the cottage, Futian had not actually been spending his days in peace. He was mistreated and forced to cultivate spells every day. Luckily, Jieyu had been cultivating with him at the moment. Whenever he was tired from the cultivation, he would look at her and feel much better. Who asked Jieyu to be so beautiful? Master, can't I even rest on the last day of the year? Futian complained to Mr. Du, who was sitting on a cliff, drinking and enjoyed the sight of the cloud sea. This is too much. You're so weak and yet you are thinking about resting every day, the old man replied in contempt without even turning his head around. How are the spells? Master, these spells are so easy to learn. Do you not believe in my talents? Futian replied in a depressing tone. Talents? You have talents, the old man said in disdain. Then, he stood up slowly and walked to Futian. You think that you're very outstanding? I wonder where you got that confidence. But these spells are really easy. Futian argued. Tell me that you are not really planning to ask me to learn all the spells in the book cave. The old man took out a thin book from his shirt and threw it in front of Futian. Since you feel those are easy, try this spell. No problem, Futian nodded. Then, he picked the book up and started reading. Slowly, his expression changed. He stopped smiling and his look turned serious as he frowned every now and then. Hua Jieyu, who was beside him, watched the scene curiously. What exactly did the master give him? After Hua Jieyu arrived at the cottage, she had been cultivating under Mr. Du together with Futian. Both of them were full attribute sorcerers and were also at the same level, so it was easy for Mr. Du to teach them together. Suddenly, Futian raised his head. Is it really an actual spell? He asked the old man who had returned to the cliff and sat down. If you cannot do it, don't suspect it. Didn't you think that you are very good? Just like this, the old man remarked with contempt. Futian widened his eyes at the old man. He is definitely doing this on purpose. Futian was totally speechless. Since he started cultivating with Mr. Du, he had been humiliated every single day. Was this really his master? Although his father-in-law would also humiliate him sometimes, Mr. Du was way worse. Thinking of this, Futian lowered his head and continued to read the book. Then, he closed his eyes and tried to cast the spell. Wood elemental vines swept towards the sky with a splashing sound. Vaguely, there was a golden radiance attached on it and the power of the wind was also following along. No. Futian shook his head and continued to try. He failed again and again but continued to try. Beside him, Hua Jieyu took the book and read through it. Her eyes were immediately filled with surprise. Although she had heard about merging different spells and casting together or even merging spells with martial arts, she had never seen such a spell before. Was it really possible to cast the same spell with spiritual qi of different elements simultaneously? Each type of spiritual qi existed independently of the other types. In a sorcerer's battle, he would often cast 2 spells simultaneously to increase their powers. For example, when he was casting an aggressive spell, he would attach a wind elemental spell on it to increase its speed and power, or perhaps attach the power of lightning. All these could be done rather easily. However, the spell that Mr. Du had given Futian was different. The spell should be formed by condensing spiritual qi of 3 different elements together. Perhaps they would be able to do this when their levels got higher. But could this really be done by an arcana plane cultivator? Yi Futian had become totally serious, as if he was trying to beat himself. Mr. Du, on the other hand, lied down on the ground and drank his wine casually. He would occasionally glance at Yi Futian and smile to himself. After a long while, Yi Futian stopped trying. Looking at the cliff, he questioned suspiciously, "Did you just give me a spell which can only be learned by a person with a level higher than the arcana plane? If you can't do it, just admit it. With only such talents, I really don't know where your arrogance came from. I wonder why I even have such a bad disciple," the old man sighed. Yi Futian gritted his teeth. This old bastard. The old man squinted his eyes. Grinning, he asked Yi Futian, "Do you want to learn?" "Yes." Yi Futian was cursing Mr. Du in his heart, but his face was filled with a bright smile. "That's it?" the old man asked. "I know that I am not talented enough. Master, please teach me. I will tolerate this for this time. Since you know that fact, you can still be saved." The old man stood up slowly. Approaching Yi Futian, he said, "Although you are a sorcerer, you are but a beginner. You don't even know what is a real spell. Using spiritual energy to communicate with spiritual chi and combining them in a simple way would only produce the easiest spells and most useless sorcerers. Spiritual chi in the world is like different strokes. You need to combine them into characters, and then turn them into a language. There are countless ways to combine them, and different combinations will produce different spells. An outstanding sorcerer is skilled at controlling every single character and can form them into various spells with ease. Therefore, you need to know thousands of spells. Only when you are familiar with them, you can be more creative, or even create a new spell." The old man said slowly. Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu both listened very attentively. Spiritual energy is the bridge between sorcerers and the characters. An arcana plane cultivator has already merged his will with the world and can sense his surroundings much better or resonate with spiritual chi around him. You need to be able to see all the spiritual chi characters in your mind at the instant when you release your spiritual energy. They are like the extenders to your arms and legs. Your spiritual energy will then be everywhere. With just a thought, all the characters will move. "Do you understand?" the old man asked. Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were both deep in thought. They need time to digest the information and put it into practice. "Haven't you comprehended noble will already? Can't you even understand such a simple reason?" the old man added in disdain. Yi Futian was stunned. He thought about the powers contained in fire elemental noble will, where he could feel an invisible power of flame. Maybe this was similar to what the master had just said. On Turtle Mountain, he had felt an even more mysterious power. It was like the rules of the world. How about a sage? Yi Futian suddenly asked in curiosity. "Sage?" The old man looked at Yi Futian and said, "A sage can kill you with a single thought." Yi Futian's eyes sparkled. "You don't believe it? Your big brother is here. I'll ask him to let you experience the broadsword will of a half-sage." Mr. Du looked at the distance. The sword saint walked over and smiling. He said, "Master, today is the last day of the year. Are you still teaching little brother? This guy is untalented and yet supercilious. To prevent him from causing me to lose face outside, I can only endure the tiring process of teaching him," Mr. Du sighed. "You heard me just now. Let him feel it." "All right," Sword Saint nodded and looked at Yi Futian. "Little brother, be careful." "Yup. Big brother, please," Yi Futian nodded. Sword Saint released his will. Immediately, Yi Futian felt an endless coldness seeping into his body. He froze at the spot, not daring to move as cold sweat broke out from his forehead. At the moment, he was engulfed by broadsword will. He felt that even his body was going to be crushed under the will. If Sword Saint wanted to kill him, he did not even have to move. The feeling only continued for an instant before disappearing. In this short while, Yi Futian's back was totally wet with sweat, as if he had just returned from hell. Seeing Yi Futian's expression, Mr. Du said, "Work hard, and don't be lazy." Then, he and Sword Saint left the place together, while Yi Futian was still standing motionlessly at the spot. In the distance, Sword Saint laughed and said, "Master, little brother is already very outstanding. Why do you have to give him an emotional blow like this? He is too arrogant and needs to learn too many things." A meaningful smile appeared on Mr. Du's face. Chapter 373, Another Year. Chapter 373, Another year. Yi Futian was somewhat depressed. Since he started cultivating, he had never received such a severe emotional blow. He continued cultivating the spell given to him by his master and tried to understand what his master had said. Although he was improving slowly, he was still not close to succeeding. After a long while, he stopped and asked, "What spell did this old guy give me exactly? It's indeed difficult to learn. Master must be trying to upset you on purpose. Don't be discouraged." Hua Jieyu gave a sweet smile. "My fox is the best." Seeing the bright smile on Hua Jieyu's face, Yi Futian opened his arms and added, "Come and encourage me then." "No. I'm going to cultivate as well." Hua Jieyu glanced at him, pouting prettily in embarrassment. Then, she turned around and similarly tried to understand Mr. Du's words previously. "What a disobedient girlfriend," Yi Futian muttered, after which he closed his eyes. Instead of continuing to cultivate spells, he started to sense his surroundings with his mind. His spiritual energy communicated with spiritual qi around him as his senses swam in the endless spiritual qi. Over these days, he had learned many spells and had indeed benefited much. While these spells were mostly mediocre and probably useless in future battles, learning them still helped in his cultivation. It became completely silent. A gentle wind blew over the bushy grass patches, causing them to feel comfortably cool. Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were both sitting there quietly and closing their eyes. At the moment, Yi Futian felt as if he no longer had a physical body. His spiritual energy seemed to have filled every corner of the sky and earth. In his senses, he had turned into an ancient tree. All the wood elemental spiritual qi around him was part of the ancient tree. Suddenly, many branches and vines appeared out of thin air in the space around Yi Futian, producing a splashing sound. With his body as the center, countless branches and vines swept outwards wildly, blotting out the entire sky. In an instant, they flooded everything around him, as if they were everywhere. His body, on the other hand, was like a divine tree, the source of everything. Puff! Yi Futian opened his eyes and stared at the scene in front of him. It was still the same spell Lock of 1,000 Vines, but when he followed his master's instructions and cast it carefully, it was indeed much more powerful than previously. Hua Jieyu also awoke in surprise. Looking at the scene in front of her, she smiled brightly. Although Yi Futian had not learned Mr. Du's spell, he had already improved a lot. This meant that at the very least his method was correct. Yi Futian grinned and continued to cultivate. He cast various spells at a lower speed, but their powers increased significantly. While cultivating, he also discussed their experiences with Hua Jieyu. In the blink of an eye, it was already close to dusk. The radiance from the setting sun poured onto Yi Futian's face, making his angular face look even more handsome. Hua Jieyu sat beside Yi Futian with her knees bent. She supported her cheeks with her hands and stared at Yi Futian, smiling. At the moment when Yi Futian opened his eyes, he immediately saw Hua Jieyu's exquisite face. Smiling, he asked, "What are you looking at?" "You." Hua Jieyu smiled sweetly. "Why is this guy looking better and better?" Yi Futian blinked and grinned. "If you continue doing this, I'll think about inappropriate stuff." "About what?" Hua Jieyu smiled and looked at him. "About doing it right now." "You don't dare to." Hua Jieyu blushed and looked even more stunning under the sunset. "Just see if I dare." Yi Futian suddenly leaped forward and pushed Hua Jieyu onto the ground. Hua Jieyu screamed as she fell down. Noticing that Yi Futian was staring blankly at her, she did not dare to look into his eyes. She turned her head away and her cheeks were blushing in embarrassment, which made her even more attractive. "Fox, you're really pretty," Yi Futian said. Hua Jieyu turned her head back slowly and widened her eyes at Yi Futian. "Get up, quick." "All right," Yi Futian replied, smiling. However, he suddenly lowered his head and kissed gently on Hua Jieyu's forehead. "Let's go and see father together." Yi Futian stood up and also pulled Hua Jieyu up. Then, he grabbed her hand and they left the place together. Hua Jieyu just allowed him to hold her hands as they ran on the emerald green grass path. Light from the falling sun showered down on the two, producing an everlasting picture. Moon Clan and Sword Saint Mountain had both shifted to Book Mountain, so naturally, Yi Futian had also brought Hua Fenglu and the rest to Book Mountain. They were currently staying in a house on the mountainside of the cottage. When Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu reached the place, they immediately smelt waves of aroma. "Master, Masteress, what good food are you making again?" Walking in, Yi Futian realized that dinner had already been prepared. Masteress and Aunt Tang were busy, while Yu Sheng, Yi Qingxian, and Tang Wan were also helping. As for those nobles and Luolan Shui, Yi Futian had already asked them to return to ancient Lulan. They should clearly spend the annual year-end with their families. The disciples on Book Mountain whose homes were in the divine capital had also gone back. Seeing the deluxe feast, Yi Futian grinned and said, "Master, I really envy you for being able to marry Masteress and Aunt Tang." Hua Fenglu glanced at him and said, "Jieyu, he's referring to something." Yi Futian turned his head and saw Hua Jieyu staring at him, smiling. "No. Absolutely not." Yi Futian smiled trembly. "I don't think so," Yi Qingxian commented as she carried a dish over. "Yu Sheng, look at your girlfriend." "What is she saying?" Yi Futian asked. Yu Sheng glanced at Yi Futian in disdain. "You're so scared of your girlfriend and you asked me to take care of mine. What's that look?" Yi Futian noticed Yu Sheng's look. It seemed that Yu Sheng had already changed drastically. "Futian, on Book Mountain you don't have to call me master," Hua Fenglu said. Yi Futian naturally knew what he meant. At the moment, Yi Futian's master was Mr. Du, so he should make certain things clear. "Master, don't worry about that. That old guy will not mind about these," Yi Futian said. "Furthermore, it's okay to have two masters. Futian, Mr. Du is an amazing person." "Don't talk nonsense," Nanda Wenin said, walking over. Yi Futian turned speechless. Even the masteress was speaking for that old guy. "All right. I'll listen to you," Yi Futian nodded. Nanda Wenin smiled and said, "Let's eat. After we finish you should go back to the cottage early to accompany your master and seniors." "I have been with my master and seniors every day. Today I shall stay here," Yi Futian said. "It's enough for Jieyu to accompany us. Who cares about you? Just finish eating and leave," Hua Fenglu said, totally unconcerned. Yi Futian immediately looked as if he had been wronged. His position in the family was indeed unbeatable. "What's your level now?" Tang Wan asked Yi Futian curiously. "Arcana Plane," Yi Futian replied. "Jieyu and Yu Sheng as well." Tang Wan's lips twitched as she was somewhat speechless. Their cultivation speed was really fast. If they were in Donghai they would already be famous. Hua Fenglu and Tang Lan were also in the Arcana Plane. It has been over 4 years. Hua Fenglu sighed as he recalled the past. In the year 9999, he came to know Yi Futian in Qingzhou Academy and took him as his disciple. Now, this disciple of his was almost as strong as he was. In the past, Yi Futian was even compared to the disciple of Art Saint, but now so many things had changed as if it was all merely a dream. "Yup, I have also known Jieyu for over 4 years now, Yi Futian nodded. On the exact same day 4 years ago, they held their hands beside Qingzhou Lake and confirmed their relationship. Tomorrow it will be the year 10004. You'll both be 20. Hua Fenglu looked at Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu. Time passed really fast. Yup, and I can get married, Yi Futian said, grinning. Everyone widened their eyes at him. This guy was really not serious at all. Wait till you are as strong as your big or third brother. It's too early now, Tang Lan said. Aunt Tang, this is too much. Yi Futian stared at Tang Lan pitifully. Big brother and third brother were both grade 1 nobles and halfway into the Sage Plain. They were standing at the top of the Eastern Barren territory. How long would he need? Let's eat. Tang Lan ignored Yi Futian, while Hua Fenglu and Nanda Wenin laughed. Then, the family happily enjoyed the annual feast. They had not had such a warm time together for a very long time. However, Yi Futian felt really speechless when he was actually chased out after the meal. Luckily, Hua Fenglu did not cruelly take away Jieyu from him and allowed her to leave with him together. After returning to the cottage, Yi Futian ate again with Mr. Du and his seniors. Then, he went to chat with Yi Wuchen and Lu Qinyu. Without anyone realizing it, it was already late into the night. A crescent moon hung in the sky. Beside the cliff in the back mountain of the cottage, Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu were sitting on the grass. A melodious music spread out, adding some vitality to the silent space. The music was beautiful yet sad, as if it was telling a very ancient story. At the top of an ancient tree in the cottage, a figure was standing quietly. Her white shirt swayed in the wind and she was like a fairy under the moon. Another person landed quietly on an ancient tree beside. He was similarly wearing a white shirt and his face was extraordinarily handsome. In the darkness, he stared at the lady in front of him. The lady, however, did not seem to have noticed him as she continued to gaze at the distance. The young man also did not speak and accompanied her in the silence. Little brother is amazing. Such a piece should only be present in heaven, the lady said, smiling. It was the second sister, Zhuge Hui. You miss home? Gu Donglu asked. Why would I miss that place? Since I have left there, I'm not going back, Zhuge Hui replied. One day, I'll bring you back, Gu Donglu said. Can you? Zhuge Hui turned around and looked at him. Gu Donglu did not say anything else. He flashed and left the place. Zhuge Hui looked at the vanishing figure. Raising her head, she stared at the crescent in the sky. At the highest place in the cottage, there was also a person lying quietly on a rocking, drinking. It was a slovenly old man in ragged clothes. As he drank, he listened to the music and seemed to be enjoying himself. I'm really glad to be able to hear Yukio again in my life, the old man muttered to himself, smiling. His look seemed to have penetrated across time as he recalled the past. Over 300 years ago, the piece Yukio appeared along with the emperors of that generation. How about now? Chapter 374, A Carriage Pulled by the Responding Dragon. Chapter 374, A Carriage Pulled by the Responding Dragon. Year 10,004 of the Divine Prefecture calendar. In the back mountains of the cottage, an ocean of clouds graced the skies along with a beautiful sunrise. Such a picturesque view. On a field of grass, music played from a guqin. The rays of the New Year's first sun fell on Yi Futian's face. Both he and his music were full of youthful spirit. Beside him, Hua Jieyu sat quietly. As the music continued to flow, she sat audience while appreciating the beautiful sunrise. Everything seemed perfect. If only life was always like this. Looking around her surroundings, the spiritual qi took shape and fell continuously. It looked like tiny sparks of gold in the air. Every bit of spiritual qi was so clearly visible to them as it filled the area they were in. This was brought about by the sounds of the guqin. When Futian used his spiritual energy to create harmony between his music and heaven and earth, all the spiritual qi in the air stood still. The first rays of sunlight shined on Futian's handsome figure. A peculiar aura radiated from him. It was almost as if he was in control of everything in existence. All the spiritual energy materialized in his mind. Spiritual qi of all elements came together with the artistic conception created by the sounds of the guqin and assimilated into his will. Just then, the fingers of Futian's right hand strummed across the chords of the guqin. As the music sounded, the spiritual qi around transformed into golden vines. They continued to grow endlessly, and as the gathered spiritual qi grew more powerful, the golden vines shot into the sky like flashes of lightning at an unbelievable speed. At this, a look of surprise spread across Hua Jieyu's face. He had succeeded. Futian had actually successfully cultivated the spell given to him by the teacher in a day. The music stopped and Futian opened his eyes. Although the sun was on him, it was not blinding. The look in his eyes was pure and held the hint of a smile. 3 elements incorporated into one spell. This brand new spell had the tenacity of the wood element, the sharpness and defensiveness of the metal element, and the speed of the wind element. It was terrifyingly powerful, far more powerful than the lock of 1,000 vines. The name of this spell, the Fatal Entanglement. Not bad. Hua Jieyu smiled. Of course. That's because I'm your man, Futian said pridefully. Hua Jieyu let out a soft humph. Do you think the old man has more of these types of spell that he's keeping to himself? Mumbled Futian. If they were all spells of this level, he would definitely be able to defeat common attacks from any cultivator at the same level. He would also no longer need to rely on the 9 heavenly attacks during battle. His strong martial arts and sorcery abilities greatly complemented each other, taking his combat ability to a whole new level. This way, even if he made his way into the Arcana plane, he wouldn't have to worry about fighting cultivators from other planes. After all, as the levels of cultivation increased, the difference between each plane also increased. People went to new means and took more powerful measures, thus causing the effects of some of his skills to decrease. Futian must do more if he wanted to have the same combat ability between different planes as he did before. How greedy, teased Hua Jieyu. This isn't greedy. How's this for greed? I want every day to be like today, so you're the first person I see in the morning. Futian chuckled. Obviously, Hua Jieyu knew what he was insinuating. She smiled softly. What are you thinking? Would you have been able to release the fatal entanglement without the help of your music? Focus on cultivating. Don't you want to gloat in front of Mr. Du later? You've got a point. Indeed, my fox is the only one who gets me, Futian nodded. Then, he closed his eyes again. Previously, he had entered a mysterious realm through his music and assimilated into the spiritual qi of the world by the means of spiritual energy. That was how he released the spell. Without the help of the Yukio song, it was difficult to do so. Futian continued on his way to enlightenment through cultivation. Many hours later, the teacher strolled in while stretching. He smiled at the sight of Futian and Hua Jieyu cultivating together. This rascal sure is diligent. Looks like I'll have to put him down a little more. Would Futian spit blood in anger if he knew what the teacher was thinking at the moment? Need to be put down for being diligent? Teacher. Hua Jieyu turned around to greet him. Morning, Jieyu. Mr. Du smiled at her. Futian stood as well. His eyes were shining as he said his greetings. Teacher, the spell you gave me yesterday was no challenge at all, I already mastered it. Oh, really? Show me. The elder male placed his hands behind his back and smiled at Futian. Futian nodded in response and closed his eyes. A peculiar force of will radiated from his body while his spiritual energy harmonized with the spiritual qi around. A moment later, the air was filled with golden vines that blocked the sun. They grew extremely rapidly and created a cage around the entire area in mere seconds. Witnessing the spell released in front of his eyes, the elder gave Futian a look. He was looking down on him. It took you a whole day to learn that, and it takes you that long to release the spell? Who's going to wait for you in a battle? If you meet a powerful opponent, you would be dead before you finished releasing the spell. Futian blinked. According to his script, wasn't the teacher was supposed to be shocked and subdued by his great gift? However, he did have a point. How come I have such an incompetent disciple? The elder sighed. Here are some more spells. Keep them and focus on cultivation. Don't even think about going anywhere else before you learn everything. I can't stand to be embarrassed by you if you leave the mountains with your abilities at this level. With that said, the elder threw some books at Futian and turned to leave. He walked with leisure, hands behind his back. He wanted to cuss but held himself back when he looked at the books in his arms. Hua Jieyu let out a laugh. Futian had finally met his match. Mr. Du was a strange man indeed. Not even her father could render Futian speechless like that. And just like that, Futian was put on house arrest. From the very first day of the new year, he was forbidden from leaving the back mountains to focus solely on cultivation. So pitiful. Futian began to miss the days before the teacher returned to the cottage. The days passed and the eastern barren territory remained quiet without any rain or storm. Those of the Qin dynasty alliance still had their heads buried in cultivation. Everyone in the eastern barren territory knew that they were preparing for the final war. Things had already escalated to this point. The battle of the eastern barren territory was inevitable. Furthermore, the Qin were in a much bigger hurry for this war to begin. Mr. Du had already returned to the cottage and all of the eastern barren territory already knew how capable he was in bringing up his disciples. There was no way they were going to give him more time to do so. After the bells rang on Sky Mountain the year before, the snow never stopped. The eastern barren territory's #1 mountain was now a snow mountain, covered with a soft, fluffy layer of precipitation. After all this time, the bells never rang again. The commotion at the foot of the mountain had also subsided. However, there was still quite a handful of people who stayed behind. For example, there was the Qianqiu Temple of the Eastern Barren Territory's western region. Now that those from Sword Saint Mountain had moved to Book Mountain, the Qianqiu Temple was now at the top throughout the western region. However, the temple still felt a wave of urgency. If a big war broke out in the Eastern Barren Territory, the times of top clans fighting for power would be over. As soon as victory was determined, all power in the Eastern Barren Territory would fall in the hands of one group. The people must pray for change, to become stronger. At the foot of Sky Mountain, the Arhat looked up at the majestic mountain. He remembered the situation when he climbed the mountain last year. That was his first time stepping onto Sky Mountain and he had reached the very top. After that time, he had tried many times, but not once did he reach such heights again. The evil energy from Sky Mountain is growing stronger, one of Qianqiu Temple's monks said from beside the Arhat. He held a strand of Buddhist beads in his hand while his sight was set on the great mountain in front of him. It's been this way since the bells rang. Furthermore, the force of repressed energy has also gotten stronger. The two energies seem to have kept at a balance from the very beginning, fighting from dominance, another person said from the side. Could it be that the bells were really the summoning of the great emperor and that someone had already made their way onto the mountain? Someone mumbled. It's very possible. The short period after the first bell would have been the perfect opportunity. Hearing the elder's words reminded the Arhat of the first time he stepped onto Sky Mountain. At that time, someone attacked him and used the spiritual qi on the mountain to force him off the mountain. If someone had really made their way to the top of Sky Mountain, could it be the same person who attacked him? Also, the bells rang again once he was off the mountain. It was when Futian came down. The nobles of the Qin dynasty had wanted to hurt him when the bells rang again. Could it really just be a coincidence? The Arhat's eyes were cold. He had a feeling. If someone really did make their way onto Sky Mountain, it was very possible that it was Yi Futian. Just then, the roar of a dragon came from the skies above. The cultivators of the Qianqiu temple were surprised. The roar did not come from Sky Mountain. It was headed for the mountain. Turning their attention, everyone looked up into the sky. Snow began to fall, blowing in the wind. In the high skies, a dragon appeared. This dragon actually had wings. It was the responding dragon, also known as the Lord of the Skies. The dragon came down toward them. Those of the Qianqiu temple were shaken as they took in the scene unfolding above them. Not just because they saw the responding dragon, but also because there were some figures standing on its back. The most shocking thing was that the dragon was pulling a carriage. Someone had arrived in a dragon-pulled carriage. A carriage pulled by the responding dragon. The happenings of the next few days had the audience at the foot of the mountain feeling unsettled. In the next few days, people continued to arrive at Sky Mountain. Some people came in a flying battleship. This ship was quite intimidating. It flew in the skies and was carried by the winds. Obviously, it was an extremely powerful ritual implement used for flight. However, the people of the Eastern Barren Territory had never seen or even heard of anything like it. Same as the other groups, this ship carried many powerful cultivators. Among them were a few beauties. They had long, slim legs, beautiful, pale skin, and exquisite features. They also made their way onto Sky Mountain. There were also cultivators that arrived mounting large demon beasts. Their demonic auras filled the skies and frightened those at the foot of the mountain. More and more cultivators gathered. Even those from the Qianqiu temple were feeling unsettled. The huge war of the Eastern Barren Territory could break out at any moment. Nobody would have expected for outside powers to arrive at Sky Mountain because of the bells at a time like this. From what they knew, the Eastern Barren Territory hadn't had these many outside visitors in many years now. After all, people aimed to reach high places. An extremely small percentage of those who left were ever willing to return. Had it not been from the relics of Sky Mountain left by the two emperors, the resource-lacking Eastern Barren Territory really didn't hold much appeal to the outside world. As the news of Sky Mountain spread, the western region was stirred up. Then, it continued to spread all throughout the Eastern Barren Territory. On Book Mountain, at the cottage, Yi Futian was the first to get the news, with the exception of those who set camp at the foot of Sky Mountain. As soon as those cultivators set foot on Sky Mountain, he knew. The Black Wind Eagle was still cultivating on the mountain. Teacher, outsiders of the Eastern Barren Territory have arrived at Sky Mountain. In the back mountains, Yi Futian spoke to Mr. Du, who was drinking while seated on a cliff. I know, the elder answered as he stared into the distance. He never expected that the bells of Sky Mountain would not only stir up the Eastern Barren Territory but also pique the interest of the outside world. Was this a good thing or a bad thing? He was very clear. Ever since the two emperors established the ban, there had been little to no contact between the Eastern Barren Territory and the outside world. Now, the territory had once again attracted the attention of the outside world. This was a big change. Come sit, said Mr. Du. Futian nodded and sat down beside him. Mr. Du didn't seem like he was in the best mood. Do you know why there were only 7 disciples in the cottage before you? Mr. Du asked suddenly. Yi Futian shook his head. Although this old man was unlikable at times, there was no doubting his teaching abilities. Chapter 376, Descend upon Book Mountain. Chapter 376, Descend upon Book Mountain. At the foot of Sky Mountain, it was a beautiful sight with dragons, golden ravens, and floating warships. Many more people were attracted to Sky Mountain. They wanted to see the strong cultivators who'd come from beyond the eastern barren territory. The extraordinary youths descended from the mountain those days to return to their camps. They couldn't climb Sky Mountain. Countless eyes focused on the beautiful figures in the sky. Even they couldn't climb Sky Mountain. Has anyone climbed Sky Mountain since the bell rang last year? A handsome youth on a dragon asked while looking down. Many people below him met his eyes and shook their heads. The Arhat's eyes flashed. The pressure of Sky Mountain increased after the last year. It was normal to be unable to climb the mountain no matter how strong you were. Yes, someone said at that time. A figure in a gold robe walked out of the robe. Seeing him, many people were confused. It was Qin Yu of the Qin dynasty. Shouldn't he be preparing the battle with the college? Why was he here? I am Qin Yu from the Eastern Barren Territories Qin dynasty. Greetings, he said, soaring into the sky. Who? The youth did not greet him back. Qin Yu had extraordinary temperament and cultivation, but he didn't care. He wanted to know who could reach the top of Sky Mountain. The sharp gazes of people of other forces landed on Qin Yu. They wanted to know too. A junior of mine reached the peak last year, Qin Yu said. Where is he? What's at the peak of Sky Mountain? A fiery youth from the Golden Raven asked. Fire intent burned in his eyes. This was because of the technique he cultivated. He was so powerful that it showed in his movements. She is in my clan. The wills of the two emperors are at the peak. They'd left a famous piece called Yukio, Qin Yu. Hua Qingqing had admitted to stepping onto Sky Mountain. She wouldn't lie. Yukio. Everyone's eyes flashed. Yukio was one of the top 10 pieces. It was said that there would be no law with it. Apparently, when Dong Huang the Great played it at his peak, he froze all the laws and time. Was it here again? If you dare lie, you will pay for the consequences. Where is she? I shall go now, the fiery youth said. I would like to see as well, a beautiful girl on a floating warship said. All strong cultivators were intrigued. They wanted to go forward and fight for the chance for Yukio. Everyone, my junior has limited cultivation, Qin Yu said, putting his hands together. She heard Yukio, but only heard it. She couldn't play it and wasn't able to learn it. She can't perform it. At this, everyone grew disappointed, but it was normal. As one of the top 10 pieces, it couldn't be easy to get. However, if she could reach the top of Sky Mountain, she must be impressive. In that case, bring her here, the youth said. Qin Yu nodded. He came to Sky Mountain because he'd heard this news. If he could get connections with these people from outside the Eastern Barren Territory, the cottage would be nothing. He guessed that these people who'd crossed such miles were probably at the Sage Plain. The hearts of the people below trembled when they heard this. They couldn't believe that someone had actually climbed Sky Mountain and heard Yukio. The Arhat's heart was clear. He knew who Qin Yu was talking about. When he was resting on Sky Mountain, Yi Futian's group had come. Hua Qingqing of the Donghua clan had been close behind Yi Futian and Yu Sheng. Qin Yu meant that Hua Qingqing had stepped onto the peak. If she reached it, then why did Yi Futian descend unharmed? This was interesting. Greetings, Crown Prince. Thinking of this, the Arhat descended and greeted Qin Yu. Qin Yu looked at him, confused. Why was the Qianqiu temple talking to him? Are you speaking of Hua Qingqing of the Donghua clan? The Arhat asked. Yes. Qin Yu nodded. Since he said it, he wouldn't hide it. Loud explosions sounded. Everyone could see a fist intent cut through the air, sweeping about as if it could destroy everything. Wind whistled with this punch. It swept with powerful force towards Gu Donglu. Boom! Ancient words flowed around Gu Donglu, forming 9 words, meaning, "May the presiders over warriors be my vanguard." Every ancient word transformed into a dazzling and powerful light. The boundless fist intent cut through the sky like a fist from heaven. It could probably destroy everything. Under this, Gu Donglu seemed so small and would be pulverized under the fist. However, he stood there without moving. When the fist intent came, the 9 words shone brilliantly. They swept across, ripping everything. The fist intent kept pressing down but vanished when they collided against the words. The strong cultivators in the air were shocked at this. They obviously felt that Gu Donglio's noble will had reached the pinnacle. Gu Donglio's eyes were cold. He stared at the other and stepped forward. With this simple step, he transformed into lightning and disappeared. After images appeared in the air. A shocking roar sounded through the air. The elder released his life spirit Dharma. It was an armored stone ape. It was huge and loomed behind him. He clenched his right hand and seemed to be one with the aggressive stone ape. Seeing the lightning, he roared angrily and punched. The stone ape roared, shaking the world. The terrifying fist was like a mountain, about to destroy everything blocking him. The fist intent kept building up too. It seemed endless and unshakable. The light streaked across and crashed into the huge and terrifying fist. An explosion sounded and the boulder flew. Heavy rumbles kept sounding. The crowd saw countless fist shadows get broken through. There seemed to be a beam of sharp light inside that couldn't be blocked. Boom! With that loud boom, the aggressive elder arched backward. A handprint appeared on his chest. The next moment, he flew back as if struck by lightning to the dragon. Someone behind him stepped forward and used powerful strength to stop him. The old man spat out blood, dyeing his collar red. "High-class clan. You can't take a hit," Gu Donglu said coldly, gazing at the elder from where he had stood earlier. The elder spat out more blood, his face completely red. It was as if the demon bird could attack their wills, causing them to be in great pain. Giving a muffled humph, Nanyu stopped and could not lift his feet anymore. Yi Futian turned around and asked, "What is it? Are we there yet?" Nanyu stared at Yi Futian. "Soon." It was still the same reply. Nanyu stared coldly at Yi Futian, and his eyes were filled with blood streaks. He could not even remember how many times Yi Futian had said that word. "Can you no longer persist?" A strange expression appeared on Yi Futian's face. "If you can't, don't force yourself as it will be dangerous. After all, you're an important person from Nantian House. If something were to happen to you..." Dong! Nanyu's eyes were filled with demonic red light, but he still took a step forward. An evil aura was flowing on his body, and even his look changed. Suddenly, he gave a muffled humph and blood flew from the corner of his mouth. Nan Feng and Chu Shang looked at Yi Futian. Although they were affected by the evilness, they were still rational. They both felt that something was amiss. If they were to continue, they would eventually collapse. Chapter 382, Game Between the Best. Chapter 382, Game Between the Best. On the cloud-shrouded first mountain of the college, a pavilion was standing on the steep summit. Here, one could get a striking view of the entire Book Mountain. At the moment, there were two old men in the pavilion playing a game of chess. They were clearly the college chief and Mr. Du from the cottage. Bai Li Shu, who was standing beside them, was somewhat puzzled. Such a scene was indeed extremely rare. It was the first time he saw his master and uncle playing chess. What wind was blowing today? Why does it feel abnormal? It has been so long since we last played. Senior, your skills have improved significantly. You are less direct than you were in the past. Now, every move of yours seems natural and yet hidden with more moves. You are a master at it, Mr. Du remarked, smiling. Your moves may seem mild, but you have secretly gained control of the entire game. Over these years, you're becoming better at planning and calculation. The long beard of the college chief swung in the air, and he was sage-like. Although he was old, his voice was firm and stable. This is not planning. This is momentum. Mr. Du shook his head. You made your moves in the whole Eastern Barren territory in an attempt to fulfill your wish. So now, how's the momentum? The college chief sneered, staring at Mr. Du. Senior, why do you have to be so unhappy? Mr. Du smiled. How many years have both of us been cultivating? How long more do I have? Sooner or later I'll pass away. I want to leave here to find a way to break through. Is it so difficult to give you this position? The college chief snarled, looking at Mr. Du. Even if you don't want it, what about your first disciple? Why did you ask him to leave that time? To fulfill your wish. Hearing the conversation between the two, Bai Li Shu was shocked. Rumors outside claimed that time, Mr. Du asked his first disciple to establish his own clan instead of staying at the college. The college chief was extremely dissatisfied with this, and a conflict broke out between the two. The real reason was actually that the college chief was looking for a person to take over his position, but Mr. Du rejected. Therefore, he thought of the Sword Saint. This was indeed surprising. Senior, do you think I'll be a good chief? Mr. Du smiled with a lazy expression. Moreover, I think you're well aware of some other reasons. College Chief Shao stared at Mr. Du. Eventually, he heaved a long sigh in his heart. He knew why Mr. Du would not take over his position, but he did not even allow Sword Saint to take over. The college chief was extremely unhappy. He did not have much time left. Although cultivators could live much longer, they were not immortal. He was not yet a sage and would still die eventually. Only after he made the breakthrough, his lifespan could be extended. Hence, he wanted to leave the Eastern Barren territory and look for opportunities outside. With his talents, he would not be able to feel the sage plane and take the last step by secluding in the Eastern Barren territory. Senior, I know that you have high hopes for me. I have also thought about how you can leave without worries after all these are finished. But... Mr. Du gave a bitter smile and shook his head. If you wish to fulfill your ambition in the Eastern Barren territory, you will go against the benefits of the others. It's certainly not as easy as you have imagined, College Chief Shao said. He knew what his junior wanted to do. That's true. It's so difficult to change just the Eastern Barren territory. Mr. Du continued shaking his head. He gazed into the distance and added, what's coming will come. Hearing his words, College Chief Shao similarly raised his head. In the sky, wind and clouds whizzed. Suddenly, the howl of dragon erupted, shocking the entire earth. Donghua clan had also crossed the point of no return. Just as Qin Yu finished speaking, an extremely sharp aura bloomed from Gu Donglu and ascended into the air, charging towards Qin Yu. His murderous intent filled the sky. Hearing Qin Yu's words, Zhuge Hui suddenly laughed. Concubine? She then put her hand near her waist. Following a soft noise, her long whip appeared in her hand. Zhuge Hui's arm trembled slightly. The whip rotated and flew into the air, turning into a white bolt of lightning which penetrated across space. In the sky, thunder roared and lightning flashed. Immediately, countless lightning flew on the whip as it swept towards the sky. It was as if the whip had turned into a lightning storm that was attempting to engulf the entire region. Every lightning in the storm held a destructive power. Anyone who got trapped in the storm would almost certainly be destroyed. Back! The people in the distance had already retreated a huge distance, but feeling the power of the storm, they ran back again as they still felt unsafe. Zhuge Hui's casual action actually caused the whole region to be enveloped in such a devastating power. Besides Sky Mountain, the people from the barren state were all surprised by the scene. It seemed that they had indeed underestimated the power of the college. At least the lady before them was very strong. This lightning spell was definitely one that had exceeded the noble level. In the sky, the expressions of Qin Yu and the rest all turned dignified. Zhuge Hui had only cast one spell, and it already caused them to feel some pressure. This lightning spell was cast by the whip, a sage ritual implement. At the moment, all the lightning forces in the world had been brought together and the catastrophic storm was charging towards them, trying to engulf every person. Leader. Qin Yu held his dragon spear in his hand, but he looked at Donghua clan leader who was beside him. The previous battle already proved that he was no match against Zhuge Hui. Donghua clan was a force which was as famous as the Qin dynasty and the college. Thus, the power of its leader was undoubtedly very strong. Donghua clan leader stared below him. He was holding a scepter in his hand, the earthly scepter. Donghua clan was well known for its spells, and its leader cultivated both martial arts and sorcery. At the moment when he held the earthly scepter, an invisible gravity enveloped the region. Accompanying a violent rumbling, brown-colored radiance stared converging wildly around him. It actually turned into many enormous meteorites which were as huge as mountains. Then, they dropped down wildly towards the lightning storm. Rumble. The sky cried and the battlefield turned into an actual doomsday. Bolts of lightning and meteorites collided into each other. Under the endless purple lightning, the meteorites were crushed continuously, but they seemed to be endless as well. They dropped down continuously, trying to fill the storm.
Zhuge Hui's rotating arms suddenly pointed directly at the sky. At once, the lightning storm engulfed the sky and stopped gathering any powers. The shirt of the Donghua clan leader swung in the air and his long hair danced. He pointed his scepter downwards and immediately, a terrifying gravity stopped the storm from ascending. Suddenly, a whip struck out from the storm towards Donghua clan leader. The expression of Donghua clan leader did not however change and a sacred, illusory figure appeared beside him. The figure looked huge and burly as if it was a divine being. He pointed his scepter out and immediately, many enormous palm prints appeared in the sky. They blotted out the sky and grabbed towards the whip, sealing the entire space. Like an agile snake, the whip suddenly changed its direction and charged towards Qin Yu. Qin Yu's body turned into a golden beam of light which dodged to the side. Then, the whip swept towards the dragon Qin Yu was on, causing it to howl ferociously. The whip wound around its huge body directly, after which the lightning storm appeared again. Zhuge Hui's arm trembled suddenly. Right away, the radiance circling around the dragon in the lightning storm turned into many lightning swords and cut the dragon into countless pieces. The dragon gave out cries of misery and roared continuously. Seeing the scene, the crowd in the distance was astounded. The dragon was a noble level 1, and its physical defense was extremely strong. However, it was cut into many pieces directly by Zhuge Hui's whip. It was then easy to imagine what the lightning storm could do to a human. All of a sudden, a wave of sword will bloomed in the sky as Futian sword clan leader stepped forward. Holding the famous sword the Alcade, he turned into a blade of light and descended from the sky. The silvery light reflected from his sword lit the entire sky as he struck directly towards Zhuge Hui, who was attacking Qin Yu. Sizzle. An extremely appalling broadsword will also bloomed. Sword Saint turned into a bolt of lightning and his broadsword will penetrated across space. It cut through the silvery blade of light and ascended straight upwards, charging towards Futian sword clan leader Han Ruoshui. That year, Sword Saint became famous after battling Han Ruoshui in Futian sword clan. At the moment, the two were fighting again. Sword Saint was actually more famous than Han Ruoshui now. However, Han Ruoshui had a famous sword, but the Sword Saint did not have any ritual implement. At the instant when they started fighting, even the sky seemed to be split into pieces. Broadsword will and sword will filled the entire sky. Even though the onlookers were very far from the battle, they could still feel how dangerous the situation was. Sword Saint did not have a ritual implement, but he chose to have a forceful close-ranged combat. Gu Dongliu's body flashed as he charged towards Qin Yu directly. His speed was extremely fast, like a mere illusion. Clang! A violent sound erupted. The First Lord of Royal Xian Temple struck down with a golden bell, blocking Gu Donglu. The golden bell flew in the sky and a frightening pressure was spreading from it. Another sage ritual implement. Does Royal Xian Temple also have one? Many people were shocked. Maybe it was from Qin Dynasty's ancient tomb and somehow Royal Xian Temple First Lord got it. Perhaps the sword of Futian's sword clan leader came in the same way. All the three of them have ritual implements. In addition, Qin Yu, Lady Yuxiao, and Lu Nantian had not participated in the battle. It's no wonder that they dared to come here directly with so much confidence. Many people discussed. Nevertheless, the three cottage disciples were indeed very strong. To deal with them, Qin Dynasty needed so many powerful cultivators as well as the aid from sage ritual implements. Look at Sword Saint, someone exclaimed. The melee combat between Sword Saint and Han Ruoshui even caused space to split apart.
As they battled, they rose higher and higher into the sky and were hardly visible. The rest could only see blades of light, as well as the broadsword will and sword will that had filled the place. However, Sword Saint's actions suddenly became much slower, but the broadsword will from his body grew in intensity. A broadsword appeared in his hand and his every move looked all natural as he turned the forces in the world into broadsword will. When he struck out, a straight beam of light appeared, cutting the sky into two halves. Han Ruoshui struck out wildly with the Alcade, but his attacks were crushed in the broadsword will. Hence, he could only retreat and his situation looked bleak. Go and help him, Qin Yu shouted at the Lord from Royal Xian Temple. On the other hand, he tried to block Gu Donglu with the dragon spear in his hand. Gu Donglu was as famous as him and that time Gu Donglu even won Lu Nantian, but at the moment Qin Yu had a ritual implement. Alright. The Lord from Royal Xian Temple flashed and struck out at Sword Saint with the golden bell. Looking at the battle in the sky, many people were speechless. Futian sword clan leader and the Lord from Royal Xian Temple both had sage ritual implements, and yet they could only barely fight against Sword Saint. It was a wild scene to witness as there seemed to be no end to these images of Gu Donglu. Behind Qin Yu, the dragons rushed out only to realize that a powerful force of energy gathered which led to the release of war gods. The images of 9 war gods graced the skies. They were majestic and formidable with ancient characters revolving around them. They were ready to take on the dragons. So powerful, thought the crowd as they observed from afar with racing hearts. They were too powerful. The 3 eldest disciples of the cottage were ready to take on the top dogs of various great forces. The second disciple, Zhuge Hui, a goddess-like beauty, was up against the clan leader of the Donghua clan. The first disciple, the Sword Saint, fought two men while the third disciple, Gu Donglu, fought Qin Yu who had a ritual implement. However, the Qin dynasty had people who had yet to make their move. Lady Yu Xiao watched the battle between clan leader Hua and Zhuge Hui. She was ready to tag him out at any time. It was obvious the couple didn't want to bully a junior cultivator by fighting together. After all, Zhuge Hui could only be considered a junior to them. Lu Nantian did not make a move either. He observed the battle between Qin Yu and Gu Donglu. He had fought Gu Donglu all those years ago in Dongqing College, but Gu Donglu was much more powerful now. He had already made his way into the Grade 1 noble plane. At the same time, he was enlightenment with a sliver of sage abilities. Although it was just the basics, he was on his way up. As for the other cultivators, they were all gathered in the air around the Battle of the Sword Saint. Better safe than sorry. If both clan leader Han Ruoshui of the Futian Sword Clan and the First Lord of the Royal Xian Temple couldn't handle him, they would be ready to attack him as a group. They had their hearts set on coming out victorious in these battles. They could never allow these three eldest disciples of the cottage to return to the college alive. The cultivators from the barren state watched the battles in shock. They were surprised at just how capable the college's disciples were. They all had sage abilities. If they were willing to go to the barren state, it would only be a matter of time that they entered the sage plane. Never in a million years did they expect this. Du Ao eyes were trained on the battlefields. He took notice of clan leader Hua and Lady Yu Xiao's abilities. They were extremely powerful indeed. He wondered what they would do if they knew about what he had done to their daughter. He wasn't worried though. He had brought quite a lot of powerful cultivators from the Holy Fire clan. Besides, did they even have the guts to take him on even if they knew? At the Qianqiu Temple's campsite, the Arhat had already returned. He took a look at the battlefields and let out an emotionless smile. This was exactly the situation he talked about. He had another thought. If this situation got even messier, would it be able to start a bigger storm that would drag in the top powers of the barren state as well? In the end, the Qin dynasty and the college would both suffer great losses and may even have their names wiped from the eastern barren territory. This way, the Qianqiu Temple, the Witch clan, and the Ji family would be the only top powers left in the eastern barren territory. "What are you thinking about?" asked a monk when he saw the little twinkle in the Arhat's eyes. "I was wondering when our temple would be able to spread throughout the eastern barren territory and receive the respect of the people," answered the Arhat. "Buddhism reaches those who were fated for it. There is no need to be greedy for the respect of the people. Fate comes from Buddha. If it's not fated to be, there is no need to force it," explained the monk who now held his hands together. "Do you know why our temple is built in the western region of the eastern barren territory, facing Sky Mountain, and why we refuse to move elsewhere? To use the evilness from Sky Mountain to strengthen our hearts for Buddhism. To be unaffected by the invasion of evils is the fruit of our labors," said the Arhat. "There is one more reason. With a clear heart, you will be able to see your true self. Knowing your true self will help rid yourself of all inner evils. Those cultivating in Buddhism have no need in the business of the material world," said the monk. He held his Buddhist beads tightly and closed his eyes. "Thank you for your advice, Abbot." The Arhat put his hands together and bowed his head lightly at the head monk. Naturally, he understood the meaning behind the abbot's words. On Sky Mountain, Yi Futian's group made their way off the mountain at an unusual speed despite the ground being covered in snow. In no time, they were halfway there. This was when they noticed a figure seated quietly among the snow and boulders of the mountain. The person was covered in a thick layer of white snow. All that could be seen through the thick blanket of precipitation were a pair of beautiful eyes. It was Hua Qingqing. She was waiting. The demon bird was able to find him, so Yi Futian was able to see everything on Sky Mountain. He walked toward her and removed his long, white robe before draping it over the girl. "It's cold." He smiled at her. Her innocence-filled eyes met his. "He has great eyes." "Thank you." Hua Qingqing spoke softly. Yi Futian smiled and turned away. He knew the true meaning behind her words of gratitude. "What a gentleman," teased Nan Yu. He looked over at Hua Qingqing and lowered his voice. "Such a pity." In his opinion, she had already fallen to the wrath of Du Ao. It was truly a pity that this innocent, beautiful girl was taken advantage of by a guy like him. Nan Yu's heart wavered for her, as beauties did to many. Chu Shang also looked sympathetically at Hua Qingqing. The group then proceeded on their journey off the mountain. After they left, Hua Qingqing shook the snow on her body before her thin arm, white as snow, reached out. Yi Futian obviously knew that her clothes were half ruined. She put on Yi Futian's white robe, not caring how it might look to other people. She then followed the footsteps left behind by Yi Futian's group and headed off the mountain. At this point, the group reached the side of the mountain and with a giant leap, they were in the air, descending from Sky Mountain by flight. At the foot of the mountain, the camp set by the people seemed so orderly. 3 different battles had broken out in the sky. There were the cultivators from the barren state and the others who observed off to the side. When Yi Futian and the others leaped off the mountain, they landed in the middle of a battle. Big brother, second sister, third brother. Yi Futian froze. He then saw Qin Yu and the others, which caused his expression to turn cold. The people of the Qin dynasty had actually picked a fight with his senior brothers and sister at Sky Mountain. Du Ao turned his attention in one direction in confusion. That was when he saw Hua Qingqing and smiled in her direction. Hua Qingqing had also seen him, but her expression was cold. "She's actually okay." The Arhat was surprised. He looked at Hua Qingqing and saw the clothes she was wearing. He couldn't help but let out an interested expression. Could there be a story on Sky Mountain? Hua Qingqing was wearing Yi Futian's clothes and she had also purposely lied about Yi Futian's time on Sky Mountain. The Arhat was sharp at picking up these things and it felt strange. Could something truly interesting have happened at the top of Sky Mountain back then? Qingqing. From afar, Lu Nantian saw her. Then, he saw the clothes she was wearing and the look on his face changed. "Capture Yi Futian," ordered Qin Yu, who was in the middle of his battle with Gu Donglu. Some cultivators who had been observing in the sidelines charged in Yi Futian's direction. They really have a death wish. In the midst of her battle, Zhuge Hui struck down with her long whip, forcing clan leader Hua back. She then rushed over to Yi Futian, leaving behind only illusory images of herself. Clan leader Hua reached out and his large hand grabbed a figure only to have it disappear in front of his very eyes. Only then did he realize that the figure wasn't really Zhuge Hui. He seemed confused for a second, then screamed loudly at the cultivators headed for Yi Futian, "Watch out!" Just as his voice rang out, Zhuge Hui appeared and snapped her long whip in their direction.